The moment Scott Daniels slid that thin manila envelope across the table at Murphy's Tavern and whispered, "Keith, you're gonna need this tonight," I knew my quiet retirement was about to end. The bar sat on the edge of Millfield, Oregon, where Highway 26 curves toward the mountains, and the smell of beer and grilled onions hung heavy in the air. I'd been coming there every Thursday since Michelle died because it felt normal and because nobody asked how I was holding up. My name's Keith Rodriguez. I'm 65 years old, and until 18 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my family. That evening, I was sitting with my son Tyler and his wife Crystal at our usual corner booth. The red vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape, and the table had decades of initials carved into it. Outside the window, the Oregon sky was doing that thing it does in late October, hanging low and gray like a wet blanket. The Douglas firs pressed close to the highway, their branches heavy with moisture from the afternoon drizzle. Inside Murphy's, the usual crowd was settling in for the evening. Old loggers nursing their first beers of the night, a couple of truckers grabbing dinner between runs, and the regulars who treated the place like their second living room. The jukebox in the corner was playing something by Merle Haggard, and the neon Budweiser sign flickered every few seconds like it was thinking about giving up. Crystal stirred her Diet Coke without drinking it, the ice clinking against the glass in a rhythm that made my shoulders tense up. She had that look on her face, the one she got when she was preparing to say something she'd been rehearsing. Tyler sat beside her, fidgeting with his car keys and avoiding eye contact with me. "Dad, you really need to think about selling the property," Crystal said finally. Her voice was light, but I could tell she'd practiced this conversation. "That land is too much for one person to handle now." I took a long pull from my Coors and set it down carefully on the table. Tyler nodded fast like he always did when Crystal spoke. He had Michelle's brown eyes and her gentle way of tilting his head when he was thinking, but none of her backbone when it came to standing up for what he believed in. "We just worry about you, Dad," Tyler said. "The taxes are going up again with all the development around Portland. Winter's coming, and you know how bad those back roads get when the snow hits." I'd heard this speech before, different variations, but always the same theme. They wanted me to sell the 41 acres Michelle and I had called home for most of our adult lives. The land that her father had sold to us for almost nothing back when Tyler was just a baby. The land where we'd raised our son, where Michelle had her garden, where I'd built my workshop and restored more cars than I could count. "I've lived on that land for 41 years, I said, keeping my voice level. "Raised you there, Tyler, fixed your bikes, taught you to drive in that backfield. I know how to take care of it." Crystal and Tyler exchanged one of those looks, the kind married couples give each other when they think they're being subtle. The kind that says they've already discussed this conversation beforehand and decided on their strategy. Except I wasn't some customer they were trying to close a deal with. I was Tyler's father, and that look didn't sit right with me. "Dad, we're not questioning your abilities," Crystal said, leaning forward with what she probably thought was a caring expression. "It's just that property values in this area have skyrocketed. You could sell that place for enough money to buy something smaller in town, closer to medical care, and still have money left over for retirement." "I am retired," I said, "have been for 3 years now, but you're still maintaining a 41-acre property by yourself," Tyler said. "The barn needs a new roof. The driveway needs gravel. The septic system is probably due for an update. That's a lot of work and expense for one person." They weren't wrong about the maintenance issues. The barn did need work, and the septic system was older than Tyler. But those were problems I could handle. Problems I'd been handling just fine since Michelle got sick. What bothered me wasn't what they were saying, but how they were saying it. Like they'd already made the decision and were just waiting for me to agree. "Besides," Crystal continued, "you spend most of your time in that workshop anyway. You could have a garage anywhere." That comment hit me wrong. The workshop wasn't just a garage. It was where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings with Michelle bringing me coffee while I worked on whatever project had caught my attention. It was where Tyler had learned to change oil and check spark plugs. It was where I'd restored the 1967 Camaro that was still sitting there 90% complete, waiting for me to finish the interior work that Michelle had picked out just before she got sick. They got up to pay the bill together, whispering by the register like they'd been doing more and more lately. I stayed seated, fishing for my wallet even though I knew they'd already taken care of it. They always paid now, ever since Michelle's medical bills had eaten into our savings. Another reminder that they thought I couldn't handle my own affairs. That's when Scott appeared, sliding into the booth across from me, so suddenly I nearly knocked over my beer. He's in his late 60s with a gray beard that's gone completely white around his mouth from years of smoking. He always wears that Vietnam veteran cap with the pins on it, and tonight his eyes had an intensity I'd rarely seen outside of our old Army days. Keith Rodriguez, he said, not a question, just my name, like he was confirming something. Yeah, Scott, what's going on? He placed that envelope on the table between us, right next to my empty beer bottle. The manila was thin, maybe containing just a few sheets of paper, but his hand shook slightly as he let it go. The tremor surprised me. Scott had steady hands, the kind you develop after 20 years of military service and another 20 working construction. You're gonna need this tonight, he said quietly, glancing toward the register where Tyler and Crystal were still talking. Whatever you do, don't open it here. Don't let them see it. I started to ask what he meant, how he knew about whatever family drama was playing out at my dinner table, but he was already standing up. Scott had always been a man of few words, but this was different. This felt urgent. Scott, what the hell is this about? He looked toward Tyler and Crystal, then back at me. Michelle knew things, Keith. Things she didn't have time to tell you before she passed. She asked me to watch out for you, to make sure you got this when the time was right. What kind of things? But he was already walking away, moving faster than I'd seen him move in years. By the time Tyler and Crystal returned to the table, Scott was out the door and climbing into his old Ford pickup. Everything okay, Dad? Tyler asked, looking around like he'd missed something important. Fine, I said, maybe too quickly. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket before either of them could see it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I hoped they'd think it was just the arthritis that had been bothering me lately. The drive back to my place was all small talk about weather and property values. Tyler drove while Crystal scrolled through real estate listings on her phone, occasionally reading off prices that made me wonder when houses in Oregon had become more expensive than cars used to be. They dropped me off at the end of my gravel driveway, like they always did, declining my offer to come in for coffee. We'll talk more about this soon, Dad, Tyler said through the driver's side window. Just think about what we discussed, okay? I watched their silver Lexus disappear down the road, its taillights swallowed by the evening fog that was rolling in from the coast. Then I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind in the Douglas firs and feeling like someone was watching me from the tree line. My house waited at the end of the quarter-mile gravel driveway, white siding and green trim standing out against the dark forest behind it. Michelle and I had painted it those colors 15 years ago during one of Tyler's summer visits home from college. He'd complained about the work then, saying his friends were spending their summers at the beach while he was scraping old paint in the Oregon woods. Now I wondered if he even remembered those days, or if all he saw when he looked at the place was dollar signs. The property stretched out behind the house, 41 acres of mixed forest and cleared land that had been in Michelle's family since the 1940s. Her father had logged most of it selectively over the years, taking out the biggest trees but leaving enough canopy that the forest had stayed healthy. The old logging roads were still there, grown over with blackberry vines and young alders, but passable if you knew where to look. My workshop sat about 50 yards from the house, a 30 by 40 metal building I'd put up myself back in the late 80s. It had been my refuge for decades, the place where I'd restored classic cars and built furniture for the house. Michelle used to joke that I spent more time talking to my tools than I did talking to her, and she wasn't entirely wrong. There's something about working with your hands that settles the mind in a way conversation never can. Inside the house, I locked the front door, something I hadn't done regularly before Michelle died. Living alone changes your habits in ways you don't expect. You start noticing sounds that never bothered you before. You double-check locks that you used to leave open. You realize how much security comes from having another person breathing in the bed next to you. The envelope felt heavy in my jacket pocket, like it knew it didn't belong there. I pulled it out and set it on the kitchen table, then stared at it for a long time without touching it. The manila was old, the kind they don't make anymore, thick and substantial. Scott's handwriting was on the front, for Keith Rodriguez when the time comes. The house made those settling noises old houses make, especially in October when the temperature starts dropping at night. The refrigerator hummed. The wall clock ticked. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows with that restless sound that means winter's coming whether you're ready or not. I walked around the house, checking windows and doors like I was doing a security sweep. Old habits from my army days, I guess. 20 years of military service doesn't leave you, even when you're 65 and supposed to be enjoying retirement. You still think tactically. You still notice things that don't belong. That's when I saw the tire tracks. They were in the soft dirt near the old barn about 200 yards from the house. Fresh tracks, maybe a day or two old, from something bigger than a pickup truck. The barn had been empty for years, except for some old farm equipment and boxes of stuff Michelle couldn't bring herself to throw away. I hadn't been inside it for months. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked out there, the gravel crunching under my boots. The barn door was closed but not latched, hanging slightly open the way it does when someone's been inside and didn't quite pull it shut properly. The hinges creaked as I pulled it open. Everything looked normal at first glance. Michelle's boxes stacked along one wall, covered with dust and spiderwebs. The old John Deere tractor that hadn't run in 10 years. Some lumber I'd bought for a project I never started, but something felt different. The dust on the floor had been disturbed. Not everywhere, just in paths leading from the door to the back corner where Michelle's Christmas decorations were stored. I followed the footprints with my flashlight beam, multiple sets, at least 3 different people based on the boot sizes. They'd moved some of Michelle's boxes just enough to access something behind them. The Christmas decorations were still there, but they'd been shifted, rearranged. That's when I noticed the wooden pallet. It was sitting where it had always been, but the boxes on top of it were different. These weren't Michelle's carefully labeled Christmas storage containers. These were plain cardboard boxes, sealed with packing tape, no labels at all. Someone had been using my barn for storage, and they tried to hide it behind Michelle's things. I started to move closer for a better look when I heard a car coming up the driveway. The engine noise was different from Tyler's Lexus. Heavier, older. I clicked off the flashlight and slipped out the back of the barn, moving through the trees until I could see the house. A white pickup truck was parked in my driveway. Not a new one, but not old enough to be a classic either. The kind of truck a contractor might drive, or someone who needed to haul things but didn't want to attract attention. The driver was still inside, talking on his phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying from my position in the trees, but his body language looked agitated. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward the barn. After about 5 minutes, he ended the call and drove away without getting out of the truck. I waited another 10 minutes before I went back to the house, my mind racing. Someone was using my property for storage. Someone who had a key or knew how to get into the barn without breaking the lock. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to come and go without being seen. Someone like my son, back in the kitchen. I sat down and stared at Scott's envelope again. The house felt different now, charged with possibility and danger. Outside, dusk was sliding into full darkness. I didn't know yet that the envelope would lead me to discover just how far my own family was willing to go to keep me from interfering with their plans. I only knew that for the first time since Michelle died. I was afraid of the people I trusted most. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Scott's note had been specific. "You're going to need this tonight." That suggested timing mattered. That whatever was in the envelope was connected to something that would happen after dark. I thought about Michelle, about the last few months of her life when she'd been too weak to do much besides sit in her favorite chair and watch the birds at the feeder outside the living room window. She'd seemed worried about something during those final weeks, distracted in a way that wasn't just about being sick. I'd assumed it was fear about dying, about leaving me alone. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. At 9:30, I couldn't wait any longer. I slid my finger under the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a small brass key wrapped in tissue paper and a piece of notebook paper folded twice. The handwriting was Michelle's neat and careful, despite the shakiness that had developed during her illness. "Keith," it read, "if you're reading this, then Scott gave you the key because something is happening that I was afraid might happen. I discovered some things in the last few months that I didn't want to burden you with while I was fighting the cancer. But I couldn't die without leaving you a way to protect yourself." My hands were shaking as I read. Michelle's voice seemed to echo in the empty kitchen. "Tyler is in trouble, bad trouble. The kind that makes people do things they never thought they'd do. He's been using our land for something illegal, and Crystal is helping him. They think I didn't know, but I've been watching. I've been documenting, and I've been hiding evidence where only you would think to look for it." The paper was trembling in my hands. My wife had been playing detective while fighting cancer, and I'd never noticed. "The key opens a lockbox hidden in your workshop. Behind the Camaro, underneath the workbench where you keep the motor oil. Everything you need to know is in there. Bank records, photographs, recordings. Enough evidence to protect yourself if they try to force you off the land." I stopped reading and looked toward the workshop. The building sat in darkness beyond the kitchen window, its metal siding invisible against the black sky. Somewhere in there, Michelle had hidden evidence that would explain why Tyler and Crystal were so eager to get me out of the house. "Be careful, Keith," the letter continued. "They're not the people we raised Tyler to be. Desperation makes people dangerous, and they have too much to lose to let you stand in their way. But you were a soldier once, and soldiers don't surrender without a fight." The letter was signed with a simple M and a small heart, the way Michelle had been signing notes to me since we were teenagers. I folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope along with the key. Outside, the wind was picking up, and I could hear the old barn door creaking on its hinges. The sound reminded me of the tire tracks, the disturbed dust, the boxes that didn't belong. My son was using my land for something illegal. My daughter-in-law was helping him, and my wife had died knowing about it, trying to protect me from a truth that might destroy what was left of our family. I finished my coffee and checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Then I sat back down at the kitchen table to wait for full darkness. Whatever Michelle had hidden in my workshop, I was about to find out. And whatever Tyler and Crystal were planning, they were about to discover that this old soldier wasn't ready to surrender his position. At 11 p.m., I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the workshop. The night was cold enough to see my breath, and the Douglas firs swayed in the wind like giant shadows against the cloudy sky. No stars visible, which was good for what I had in mind. If someone was watching the property, darkness would give me cover. The workshop had been my sanctuary for over 20 years. I'd built it myself in 1987 when Tyler was still in high school and needed a project to teach him basic construction skills. We'd poured the concrete slab together, framed the walls, put up the metal siding. Tyler had complained about every step of the process, but he'd learned to use a level and swing a hammer properly. Inside, the familiar smell of motor oil and sawdust welcomed me like an old friend. I'd spent countless hours in this space, restoring cars that other people had given up on. The 1967 Camaro sat under a canvas cover in the center of the building, still waiting for me to finish the interior work that Michelle had been so excited about. She'd picked out the seat covers herself, red vinyl with white stitching that would match the exterior paint. I made my way to the back corner where I kept my oil supplies. The workbench there was one I'd built from scratch, heavy oak construction with drawers for small tools and shelves underneath for motor oil, transmission fluid, brake cleaner, and all the other fluids you need when you're bringing dead cars back to life. Michelle's letter had said the lockbox was hidden underneath the workbench where I kept the motor oil. I knelt down and started moving bottles, looking for anything that didn't belong. At first, everything seemed normal. Castrol GTX, Valvoline, some synthetic oil for newer cars. Then I felt something hard and metal attached to the underside of the middle shelf. The lockbox was about the size of a shoebox, secured to the shelf with heavy-duty magnetic clamps. It had been painted flat black to make it invisible in the shadows, and it was positioned where someone would have to know exactly where to look to find it. Michelle had chosen the hiding spot perfectly. The brass key from the envelope fit the lock perfectly. Inside the box was a collection of items that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing regular deposits to Tyler's account from something called Cascade Freight Solutions. Photographs taken with a telephoto lens of trucks using the old logging road behind my property, and a small digital recorder, the kind private investigators use for surveillance. I pulled out the bank statements first. The deposits were for $5,000 each, made on the 15th of every month for the past 14 months, $70,000 total. More money than Tyler made in a year selling cars at the dealership in town. The company name Cascade Freight Solutions didn't ring any bells, but the account number showed the payments were coming from a business account at a bank in Portland. The photographs were worse. They showed my property being used as some kind of staging area, large trucks parked near the old barn, men unloading boxes and crates under cover of darkness. License plates that Michelle had carefully noted on the back of each photo, and Tyler standing there directing traffic like he owned the place. My hands were shaking as I picked up the digital recorder. The display showed it contained 23 hours of recordings. I plugged in the earbuds that Michelle had included and pressed play. Tyler's voice filled my ears, clear as if he was standing right next to me. The old man goes to Murphy's every Thursday night, he was saying to someone, usually gets home by 8:30, then watches TV until he falls asleep in his chair. We've got a 4-hour window easy. What about neighbors? A voice I didn't recognize, gravelly like a longtime smoker. Nearest house is half a mile away. Miller's place, but old Frank's been in the nursing home for 6 months. Nobody's gonna see anything. And your father doesn't know about the back road. He knows it exists, but he never goes back there anymore. Mom's the one who used to walk those trails since she got sick. Dad barely leaves the house except for his Thursday night routine. I had to pause the recording. They'd been planning this while Michelle was dying, using her illness as cover to turn my property into some kind of criminal operation. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I fast-forwarded through several conversations about shipment schedules and pickup times. Then I heard Crystal's voice and my stomach dropped. We need to speed up the timeline, she was saying. The old man's been asking questions about the property taxes. wanting to see the assessments. If he starts digging into the financials, he's going to figure out we've been inflating the numbers. What are you suggesting? Tyler asked. Guardianship proceedings? We file a petition claiming he's not competent to manage his affairs. Dementia, grief-induced confusion, whatever. Once we get legal control, we can sell the property to our buyers and make this whole thing legitimate. Dad's not incompetent. A judge will see right through that. Not if we present the right evidence, missed appointments that we create, bills that don't get paid because we intercept them, medical records that suggest cognitive decline. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Crystal was planning to frame me as mentally incompetent so they could steal my land. What if he fights it? Tyler asked. Then we escalate. Rural properties are dangerous places. Tyler, 65-year-old men have accidents all the time. Falls, heart attacks, equipment malfunctions. It would be tragic, but these things happen. The recording cut off there, and I sat in the dark workshop trying to process what I'd just heard. My daughter-in-law was casually discussing my murder, and my son wasn't objecting. He was just asking practical questions about implementation. I went back to the lockbox and found more photographs. These showed the inside of my barn, with boxes stacked where Michelle's Christmas decorations used to be. There were inventory sheets, handwritten lists of contents and delivery schedules. And there were names, contacts for what looked like a distribution network stretching from Portland to Seattle. At the bottom of the box was another letter from Michelle, this one shorter than the first. Keith, I know this is hard to accept. I didn't want to believe it either when I first started noticing the signs. Tyler coming by when he thought we weren't home. Strange calls at odd hours that he took outside. Money he couldn't explain when Crystal bought that new car. I remembered the Lexus. Tyler had said Crystal got a promotion at the bank, that they were finally doing well enough to upgrade from her old Honda. I'd been happy for them. I hired a private investigator, Michelle's letter continued, a woman named Rachel Torres who used to be state police. Everything in this box came from her surveillance work. She's good at her job and she's discreet. If something happens to me, if this cancer takes me before I can handle this situation myself, I want you to call her. Her number is on the business card. I found the business card at the very bottom of the box. Rachel Torres, Private Investigations, specialized in domestic surveillance and corporate fraud. Her office was in Salem, about 90 minutes south of my place. Michelle's final message was on the back of the business card, written in her careful handwriting. Trust Rachel, trust Scott. Don't trust the local police. Deputy Williams has been asking too many questions about our property for someone who's supposed to be patrolling a different district. I packed everything back into the lockbox and secured it under the workbench. Then I sat in my workshop for a long time, listening to the wind and thinking about what I'd learned. Tyler wasn't just in financial trouble. He was running some kind of smuggling operation using my land as a storage facility. Crystal wasn't just greedy. She was the mastermind behind a plan to either steal my property legally or kill me if legal methods failed. And they'd been planning this for over a year, using Michelle's illness as cover for their activities. The worst part was the timing. They'd started this operation right around the time Michelle was diagnosed. While I'd been focused on her treatment, driving her to chemotherapy appointments and staying up nights when the pain was too bad for her to sleep, Tyler and Crystal had been turning my backyard into a criminal enterprise. I thought about all the times Tyler had offered to help out around the property while Michelle was sick. All the times he'd volunteered to run errands or pick up supplies from town. He hadn't been helping. He'd been scouting, learning my routines, figuring out when the property would be empty. The anger that hit me then was unlike anything I'd felt since my army days. Clean, focused anger that cut through confusion and grief like a blade. These people had betrayed not just me, but Michelle's memory. They'd used her death as an opportunity to steal everything we'd built together. But anger without a plan is just rage, and rage gets people killed. I needed to think like a soldier again, assess the situation, identify assets and threats, develop a strategy for victory. I had evidence, but not enough to guarantee a conviction. I had allies in Scott and Rachel Torres, but I didn't know how far the corruption extended. Deputy Williams was compromised, which meant I couldn't trust local law enforcement. Most importantly, I had time. Tyler and Crystal thought I was a grieving old man who could be manipulated or eliminated at their convenience. They didn't know that Michelle had left me a roadmap to their operation. They were about to learn that this old soldier still knew how to fight. That evening, Rachel met me at a rest area 10 miles from my property. She was driving a different car this time, a gray Ford pickup that looked like half the trucks in rural Oregon. The surveillance equipment was in a canvas bag that could have contained fishing gear or camping supplies. Motion-activated cameras, she explained, showing me devices no bigger than matchboxes. Battery life is 90 days, infrared capability for night recording, wireless transmission to a base unit all set up in your house. They're designed for wildlife monitoring so they'll blend in perfectly in a forest environment. The audio equipment was even more sophisticated, digital recorders that could be voice-activated or programmed to record at specific times, wireless microphones disguised as common objects, a smartphone app that would let me monitor and control everything remotely. Michelle helped design this setup, Rachel said. She spent weeks studying the property, identifying the best surveillance positions, mapping out the routes Tyler's people used to access the barn. We drove back to my place separately, Rachel following at a distance to make sure we weren't being watched. At my house, she parked her truck behind the workshop where it couldn't be seen from the road. The next 2 hours were like a crash course in private investigation. Rachel showed me how to position the cameras for maximum coverage without making them obvious. We placed 3 around the barn, 2 along the old logging road, and 1 overlooking the main driveway. Each camera was camouflaged to look like a birdhouse or tree knot. The key is thinking like the people you're watching, Rachel explained as we installed a microphone in the barn. Tyler knows this property. He'll notice if something looks out of place, but he's also gotten comfortable with his routine. Criminals always do. They start thinking they're invisible. Inside the barn, we found evidence that the operation was more sophisticated than I'd realized. The boxes I'd seen before were just part of it. They'd installed temporary lighting that could be quickly set up and taken down. They'd even run power from the main electrical panel in my house, tapping into the circuit that fed the barn's original wiring. Professional job, Rachel said, examining the electrical work. Someone with experience in logistics and temporary installations. Military? Possible. Or someone who's worked in construction or shipping. The level of organization suggests this isn't their first operation. We installed audio equipment in 3 locations in the barn, hidden inside empty boxes and behind support posts. Rachel showed me how to test the equipment using an app on my phone and how to download recordings remotely without having to physically access the devices. The beauty of this system is that it's completely passive, she said. You don't have to do anything except maintain your normal routine. The equipment will capture everything automatically. By midnight, we had the surveillance network operational. Rachel's laptop showed feeds from all 6 cameras, with clear views of the barn, the logging road, and the approaches to my house. The audio equipment was picking up conversations from inside the barn even when we whispered. Now comes the hard part, Rachel said. Waiting. Maintaining normal behavior, acting like a grieving widower who's not sure what to do with his property. How often do they usually operate? Based on Michelle's observations, every 10 to 14 days, usually on weekends when commercial traffic is lighter and there are fewer people around to notice truck activity. So we could be waiting 2 weeks, maybe. Or Tyler might accelerate his timeline if he feels pressure to resolve the property situation. Either way, we'll be ready. After Rachel left, I sat in my kitchen reviewing everything we'd accomplished. My property was now equipped with military-grade surveillance equipment. I had a direct link to a private investigator who understood the scope of the criminal operation. And I had Michelle's detailed plan for bringing down the people who'd betrayed our family, but I also had a target on my back. If Tyler and Crystal suspected I knew about their operation, they'd shown they were willing to kill me to protect it. The smart thing would have been to pack a bag and disappear until the investigation was complete. The problem was, running wasn't in my nature. 20 years in the Army doesn't teach you to retreat from a fight, it teaches you to assess the situation, plan your strategy, and execute with precision. Tyler might have forgotten that his old man was a soldier, but he was about to get reminded. The first test came 3 days later. I was working in my shop, genuinely trying to finish some trim work on the Camaro when I heard vehicles approaching on the logging road. 2 trucks, moving slowly to minimize engine noise. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, earlier than their usual operational window. I checked my phone. All 6 cameras were recording, and the audio equipment was picking up voices as the trucks parked near the barn. I put on headphones and listened to the live feed. Quick turnaround today, someone was saying we need to be gone by 400. The old man usually gets back from town around then. Tyler's voice answered, no problem. This is just a pickup, not a full shipment. 30 minutes max. I felt anger rising in my chest. They were timing their operations around my grocery shopping schedule. They'd been watching me for months, learning my habits, treating me like an obstacle to work around instead of a person who owned the property they were using. Through the workshop window, I could see them unloading boxes from the barn and loading them into the trucks. 4 men total, including Tyler. They moved efficiently, like a team that had done this many times before. The whole operation took exactly 28 minutes. After they left, I checked the camera footage on my phone, clear images of faces, license plates, and the contents of several boxes, audio recordings of conversations about delivery schedules and payment arrangements. More evidence than Michelle could have gathered in weeks of surveillance. That evening, Tyler called. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How are you doing?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice level. "Just working on the Camaro." "Still trying to finish that project? You've been working on that car for what, 10 years? 12 years? Your mother picked out the interior before she got sick, right?" "Well, maybe when you sell the property you can take the car with you. Classic Camaros are worth good money these days." "I'm not selling, Tyler." There was a pause. "Dad, we've talked about this. You can't maintain that property by yourself forever. Crystal ran some numbers, and the tax burden is just going to keep increasing. It's not sustainable. I'll manage. What if we found you a nice place in town, closer to medical care, easier to maintain? We could handle all the details, make the transition as smooth as possible." I said, "I'm not selling." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay, Dad. But think about it, all right? We just want what's best for you." After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the conversation. Tyler was escalating the pressure, moving from gentle suggestions to dire financial warnings. The timeline Rachel had predicted was compressing. They were getting impatient. I called Rachel and left a message. "First operational recording complete. They're pushing harder on the property sale. May need to accelerate timeline." She called back an hour later. "Good work on the recording. I reviewed the footage remotely. We've got faces and plates for all 4 men. Tyler, plus 3 others who match descriptions from other theft cases I've been tracking. What's the next step?" "We wait for a larger operation. What we recorded today is good, but it's just evidence of receiving stolen goods. We need to document the source of the theft and the distribution network to build a RICO case. How long soon?" "The frequency of small operations usually indicates a large shipment is coming. My guess is they're clearing inventory to make room for something big. And if Tyler tries to force the property sale before then we improvise. But Keith, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this situation could turn dangerous very quickly. Tyler and Crystal aren't just stealing from you. They're running an operation that could send them to prison for 20 years or more. People facing that kind of time do desperate things." After she hung up, I walked through my house checking locks and windows. Then I went to my gun safe and took out the .45 automatic I'd carried in Vietnam. I'd hoped never to need a weapon again, but hoping and being prepared are 2 different things. I cleaned the gun, loaded it, and placed it in the kitchen drawer where I could reach it quickly. Then I sat at the table where Michelle used to do her crossword puzzles and waited for my family to show me just how far they were willing to go to steal everything I had left. The war for my property was escalating, and this old soldier was ready for whatever came next. The pressure campaign started the next morning with a knock on my door at 7 a.m. Tyler stood on my porch holding a manila folder and wearing the expression he used to get as a kid when he'd broken something and was trying to figure out how to explain it. "Morning, Dad. Sorry to come by so early, but Crystal wanted me to drop this off before I went to work." He handed me the folder. Inside were documents from the county assessor's office showing a dramatic increase in my property taxes. Medical bills from Michelle's cancer treatment that I thought had been paid by insurance, and a letter from a Portland law firm requesting a meeting to discuss estate planning options. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew this was the manufactured financial crisis Crystal had mentioned in the recordings. "Crystal's been helping you organize your finances," Tyler said. "She noticed some discrepancies in your accounts, bills that haven't been paid, tax obligations that are coming due. Dad, you're looking at maybe $47,000 in obligations over the next 12 months. I flipped through the papers. The tax assessment was legitimate, but it was for the full assessed value of the property, not the agricultural exemption rate I'd been paying for years. The medical bills were from providers I'd never heard of, for treatments Michelle never received. The law firm letter was addressed to Tyler, not me, discussing guardianship procedures. "These aren't my bills," I said. Tyler's face got that patient expression adults use when they're dealing with confused elderly people. "Dad, I know this is overwhelming. That's why Crystal thinks it would be best if we handled the financial details for you, just temporarily, until we can get everything sorted out. I can handle my own finances. Can you? Because according to these records, you've missed payments on your homeowner's insurance, you're behind on property taxes, and you've been bouncing checks at the grocery store." "That's impossible. I balance my checkbook every month." "When was the last time you actually looked at your bank statements?" The question caught me off guard because it had been a while. Since Michelle died, I'd let the automatic payments handle most bills and hadn't been paying close attention to the details. It was possible they'd been manipulating my accounts without me noticing. Look, Dad, we don't want to make this complicated. Crystal found a buyer for the property, someone who's willing to pay full market value. You could walk away with enough money to buy a nice place in town and still have plenty left over for retirement. Who's the buyer? A development company from Portland. They're looking for rural properties to convert into vacation rental complexes. The location is perfect, close to the mountains but still accessible. I thought about the stolen electronics operation, the regular truck traffic, the criminal organization that had been using my land for over a year. A development company would shut down Tyler's operation permanently, which meant they needed to find a new storage facility. Unless the development company was part of their criminal network, I need to think about it, I said. Of course, but Dad, time is a factor here. The tax obligations are real, and they're due soon. If you wait too long, you could lose the property anyway through foreclosure. After Tyler left, I called my bank and my insurance company. The insurance was paid up and current. The bank showed no bounced checks and confirmed that all my automatic payments were processing normally. Either Tyler was lying about my financial situation or Crystal was manipulating records behind the scenes. I spent the afternoon installing additional security measures around the house. Motion sensors on the doors and windows, a camera system that would alert me if anyone approached the property during the day. If they were escalating to financial manipulation and forged documents, physical threats couldn't be far behind. That evening, Rachel called with an update. I ran background checks on the people we identified in yesterday's surveillance. Marcus Walsh has 2 prior convictions for cargo theft. The Garrett brothers are part of a crew that's been hitting trucks between Portland and Seattle for the past 3 years, and the development company Tyler mentioned, it doesn't exist. I checked corporate filings in Oregon and Washington. No business license, no tax records, nothing. So the buyer is fake, completely fabricated, which means they're planning to steal the property through the guardianship proceedings, then transfer it to themselves or their criminal associates. How long do we have? Crystal filed preliminary guardianship papers yesterday morning. The hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday, 6 days from now. She's moving faster than we expected. Can we stop it with what we have now? Maybe, but it would mean exposing our surveillance operation before we've gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire network. We'd get Tyler and Crystal, but the bigger fish would disappear. I sat in my kitchen looking at the forged financial documents Tyler had brought that morning. My son was trying to steal my home using legal procedures designed to protect elderly people from financial abuse. The irony was almost funny, except that it wasn't. What if I don't show up for the hearing? They'll win by default. A judge could grant them temporary guardianship, which would give them legal authority to sell the property immediately. And if I do show up, you'd need to prove that the financial crisis is manufactured and that Tyler and Crystal have ulterior motives. That means revealing at least some of our evidence. Rachel, I'm 65 years old. I've been married, raised a son, served my country, and buried my wife. I'm not going to spend what's left of my life hiding from my own family while they destroy everything Michelle and I built together. There was a long pause. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to go on the offensive. The next morning, I drove to the VFW post for the Thursday breakfast meeting I'd been attending since Michelle died. Scott was there, along with 8 other veterans ranging from Vietnam era to Iraq War. These were men who understood duty, honor, and the importance of fighting for what's right. Keith, Scott said as I sat down at our usual table, "You look like a man with something on his mind." I looked around the table at faces I'd known for years. Men who'd served their country and come home to build lives in small-town Oregon. Men who understood what it meant to have your back against the wall and no choice but to fight. "I need some help," I said. "Family trouble." For the next hour, I told them everything. Michelle's hidden investigation, the criminal operation on my property, Tyler and Crystal's plan to steal my land through guardianship proceedings. I showed them some of the evidence enough to convince them I wasn't suffering from grief-induced delusions. "Jesus, Keith," said Ray Martinez, a retired state police detective who'd been coming to these breakfasts for 15 years. "Your boy's gotten himself into some serious trouble." "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Scott asked. I looked around the table, 8 veterans with a combined century of military and law enforcement experience. Men who'd fought for their country and weren't about to watch one of their own get victimized by family members who'd forgotten the meaning of honor. "I've got a plan," I said, "but I'm gonna need backup." By the time we left the VFW post, I had a team. Ray Martinez would use his contacts in state law enforcement to verify that our evidence would hold up in court. Scott would coordinate surveillance shifts to make sure I wasn't caught off guard by any escalation from Tyler's people. 2 other veterans with security experience would help me prepare defensive positions around my property. The war for my land was about to become a military operation, and this old soldier finally had his squad back together. Tuesday morning, I put on my dress uniform for the first time in 15 years and drove to the courthouse for the guardianship hearing. The uniform still fit, mostly, and the decorations were still bright enough to catch the light. I wanted the judge to see me as a veteran, not as a confused old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. Crystal was already there with a lawyer I didn't recognize, a sharp-dressed woman with the kind of cold eyes that come from years of courtroom combat. Tyler sat beside them, fidgeting with his tie and avoiding eye contact with me. When my name was called, I stood and walked to the defendant's table alone. Crystal's lawyer looked surprised. "Your Honor," she said, "we were expecting Mr. Rodriguez to have representation." "I'm representing myself," I said. "And I have evidence that this entire proceeding is based on fabricated financial documents and fraudulent medical claims." The judge, an older man who'd probably seen every scam in the book during his years on the bench, leaned forward with interest. "What kind of evidence, Mr. Rodriguez?" I pulled out my folder and began laying out Michelle's investigation piece by piece. Bank records showing Tyler's payments from the fictitious freight company, photographs of criminal activity on my property, audio recordings of Tyler and Crystal discussing my murder. The courtroom went dead silent as I played the recording of Crystal casually suggesting that 65-year-old men have accidents all the time. "Your Honor," I said when the recording ended, "these people aren't trying to protect me from financial incompetence. They're trying to steal my property to protect a criminal enterprise that's been operating on my land for over a year." The judge looked at Crystal and her lawyer with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Counselor, I think we need to discuss whether your clients need criminal representation instead of family court proceedings." That's when the real fight began. Crystal's lawyer recovered quickly, which told me she'd been in situations like this before. "Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez is clearly experiencing significant emotional distress following his wife's death. These recordings could be fabricated, the documents manipulated. We're dealing with a man who's been isolated for 18 months, possibly suffering from depression and paranoia. The recordings are authentic," I said, "and I have witnesses who can verify the criminal activity on my property." "What witnesses?" the judge asked. That's when Scott Daniels stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor, I'm Scott Daniels, United States Army, retired. I've been conducting surveillance of criminal activity on Mr. Rodriguez's property at the request of his deceased wife." Ray Martinez stood up next to him. "Ray Martinez, Oregon State Police, retired. I can verify that the evidence Mr. Rodriguez has presented is consistent with ongoing investigations into cargo theft operations in this region." The judge looked from Scott to Ray to me, then back at Crystal and her lawyer. "This is highly irregular. I'm going to recess this hearing for 30 minutes while I review these materials. Counselor, I suggest you contact your client's criminal defense attorneys. They're going to need them." During the recess, Crystal and Tyler huddled with their lawyer in the hallway. I could see Crystal's face getting redder as the lawyer explained what was happening. Tyler looked like he was about to throw up. "Keith," Ray said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "that was well done, but you know this isn't over, right? They're going to regroup and come at you harder." "I know, but at least now it's out in the open. No more pretending this is about my welfare." Scott was checking his phone. "Rachel Torres just texted me. There's significant activity at your property right now. Multiple vehicles, people moving boxes out of the barn. They're shutting down the operation." I felt a surge of anger. While we'd been in court, Tyler's criminal associates were destroying evidence and abandoning my property. By the time we got back there, the barn would be empty and cleaned, leaving nothing but my word against theirs. When court reconvened, the judge had made his decision. "I'm dismissing this guardianship petition," he said. "The evidence presented suggests that the financial crisis described in the filing is fabricated, and there are serious questions about the motives of the petitioners. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud and elder abuse charges." Crystal's lawyer immediately stood. "Your Honor, my clients request immediate dismissal of all charges pending a full investigation of these allegations." "Your clients are free to leave," the judge said, "but they should make themselves available to law enforcement for questioning." Tyler finally looked at me as they were packing up their papers. The expression on his face wasn't anger or fear. It was disappointment, like I'd let him down by fighting back, Dad. He said quietly, "You don't understand what you've just done. I understand perfectly. I've stopped you from stealing my home. It's not about the money. There are people involved in this who don't accept failure. They're not going to just walk away because a court case didn't go their way. Are you threatening me? Tyler looked toward Crystal, who was already heading for the exit. I'm warning you, these aren't car dealership customers, Dad. These are serious people who've invested serious money in this operation. If you think this ends here, you're wrong. After they left, I sat in the courtroom with Scott and Ray trying to process what had just happened. I'd won the legal battle, but Tyler's warning suggested the war was far from over. He's right about one thing, Ray said. If this operation was as big as your evidence suggests, shutting it down is going to cost someone a lot of money. They'll want that back or they'll want revenge. So what do you suggest? Short term. Don't go home alone. Let us check the property first. Make sure they didn't leave any surprises behind. We drove back to my place in convoy, Ray's truck leading, my pickup in the middle, Scott bringing up the rear in his Ford. The property looked normal from the road, but as we got closer to the house, I could see that something was wrong. The barn door was standing wide open, and there were tire tracks everywhere. Deep ruts in the grass where heavy vehicles had turned around quickly. The careful concealment that had protected Tyler's operation for over a year was gone, replaced by the obvious signs of a hasty evacuation. Inside the barn, they'd taken everything. Not just the stolen merchandise, but anything that could connect them to the operation. The temporary lighting was gone. The electrical connections had been disconnected. Even the wooden pallets they'd used for storage had been removed. Professional job, Ray observed. They knew exactly what to take and what they could leave behind. What about the surveillance equipment? Scott was checking his phone, monitoring the camera feeds, still operational. But there's nothing left to record. We spent an hour searching the barn and the surrounding area. They'd been thorough, removing evidence, but not being destructive about it. No broken windows, no vandalism, no obvious signs of anger. This was business, not personal revenge. At least not yet. Keith, Ray said as we walked back toward the house, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for the possibility that Tyler might be right? That the people behind this operation won't just accept losing their investment and move on? I thought about Michelle's final letter, her instructions to fight for what we'd built together. I thought about 41 years of memories on this land, of the workshop where I'd taught Tyler to use tools, of the garden where Michelle had grown tomatoes and roses. Ray, I spent 20 years in the Army. I've been shot at, bombed, mortared, and ambushed. I've lost friends to wars that most people have forgotten. If some criminals think they can scare me off my own land, they're about to learn that this old soldier still has some fight left. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Because Scott and I have been talking, and we think you're going to need protection for the next few weeks. At least until we can track down the people behind this operation and make sure they're not planning retaliation. What kind of protection? The kind that comes from having a squad again. Veterans watching each other's backs like we did in the old days. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen reviewing everything that had happened, I realized that the courtroom victory had been just the first battle. Tyler and Crystal were defeated, but the criminal organization they'd been working for was still intact, still dangerous, and still very interested in my property. My phone rang at 9:30 p.m. Unknown number, Keith Rodriguez. The voice was gravelly, like someone who'd smoked too much for too many years. Yeah, my name's Marcus Walsh. I think your son mentioned me, Marcus Walsh, the name Rachel had identified as the day-to-day operations manager for the theft ring, Tyler's boss. What do you want? I want to discuss a business proposition. You caused us some problems today, cost us some money, but I'm willing to let that slide if we can work out an arrangement. I'm not interested in any arrangement. Hear me out. We've been using your property for storage, true, but we've been paying your son well for the privilege. I'm prepared to offer you the same deal, only better. $10,000 a month, cash for occasional use of your barn. No, Mr. Rodriguez, I don't think you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. This operation employs a lot of people, generates significant revenue, and has investments that need to be protected. Your cooperation would be appreciated. Your interference will not be tolerated. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a chance to be reasonable. But if you choose to be unreasonable, there will be consequences. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. The criminal organization Tyler had gotten involved with was making their position clear: cooperate or face retaliation. They thought they were dealing with an isolated old man who could be intimidated into submission. They were about to discover that this old man had backup, and that backup was a brotherhood of veterans who'd faced down much scarier enemies than small-time cargo thieves. I called Scott. It's starting, I said. Scott arrived within 20 minutes, followed by Ray Martinez and 2 other veterans from our breakfast group. Danny Chen, who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan as an explosives expert, and Mike Kowalski, a former Marine sergeant who now worked private security in Portland. "All right, Keith," Scott said as we gathered around my kitchen table, "tell us exactly what this Marcus Walsh said." I replayed the conversation word for word. The offer, the threat, the implication that non-cooperation would have consequences. "Classic intimidation," Mike said. "They're testing to see if you'll fold under pressure. The question is, how far are they willing to escalate?" Ray was studying a map of my property. "We need to think defensively. This place has good natural boundaries, but there are too many access points. The main driveway, the logging road, plus at least 3-foot trails that connect to neighboring properties." "What about law enforcement?" Danny asked. "Compromised," Ray said. "We know Deputy Williams was on their payroll, but we don't know who else. And Marcus Walsh has been operating for over a year without getting caught, which suggests he's got protection at multiple levels. So we're on our own," Scott said, "for now. But Rachel Torres is working with state investigators to build a federal case. If we can hold out for a few weeks, maybe a month, the cavalry will arrive." "That's a long time to play defense against people who don't follow rules," Mike observed. Danny was examining the surveillance equipment Rachel had installed. "This is good gear, but it's designed for observation, not defense. We need to upgrade." "What do you mean?" "Motion sensors with alarms. Perimeter lighting that we can control remotely. Maybe some non-lethal deterrent systems." He looked around the table. "I'm not talking about booby traps or anything that could hurt innocent people, but there are ways to make this property very uncomfortable for uninvited guests." Ray nodded. "The goal is to make them decide that retribution isn't worth the risk. Criminals are pragmatic. If the cost of revenge exceeds the benefit, they'll usually move on." We spent the next hour planning defensive improvements. Motion-activated floodlights around the house and barn, driveway alarms that would alert us to approaching vehicles, trail cameras positioned to provide early warning of foot traffic from the surrounding forest. "What about firepower?" Mike asked. "I thought about the .45 automatic in my kitchen drawer. I've got hunting rifles and a sidearm, nothing military grade. That's probably enough. The idea is deterrence, not warfare. If they think you're prepared to defend yourself, most of them will look for easier targets." "What about Tyler?" Scott asked. "Do we consider him part of the threat, or just a pawn who got in over his head?" That was the question I'd been dreading. My son had made choices that put him on the wrong side of this conflict, but he was still my son. I don't know. He warned me that these people were dangerous, but I can't tell if that was genuine concern or just another manipulation. "Either way," Ray said, "we treat him as a potential threat until we know otherwise. Family loyalty doesn't stop bullets." Danny and Mike left to pick up surveillance equipment, while Scott and Ray helped me secure the immediate area around the house. We moved my truck to a position where it couldn't be easily disabled or blocked in. We identified defensive positions with good sight lines and cover. We established fields of fire that would protect the house without endangering neighbors. It felt like preparing for combat, which in a way, it was. At 11:30 p.m., the first probe came. Danny's motion sensors detected movement on the logging road, multiple vehicles approaching slowly with their headlights off. Mike was monitoring the camera feeds from a laptop set up in my living room. 3 vehicles, he reported. "Looks like they're stopping about 200 yards out, near the bend where the road curves toward the barn." "Visual on personnel?" Ray asked. "Negative. Too dark, and they're staying inside the vehicles. We watched on the monitors as the vehicles sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes. No one got out. No obvious reconnaissance activity, just 3 vehicles sitting in the dark, letting us know they were there. Psychological warfare," Scott said. "They want us to know they can approach the property whenever they want." Then the vehicles backed out and left, disappearing down the logging road as quietly as they'd arrived. "Testing response time," Danny observed. "They now know we've got surveillance and that we're prepared to respond quickly to intrusion. Is that good or bad?" I asked. "Depends on what they do next," Ray said. "Either they'll decide we're too much trouble and move on, or they'll escalate to more direct methods." The answer came at 2 a.m. with a phone call. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Marcus Walsh again. I hope you enjoyed our little visit tonight. What do you want? I want you to understand that we can reach you anytime we choose. Your friends, your security measures, they're impressive for amateurs, but we're professionals. Get to the point. The point is that cooperation is still an option. $15,000 a month now, considering the inconvenience you've caused us. Or we can continue these late-night visits until you change your mind. I'm not changing my mind. Then let me make something clear. We know about your breakfast meetings at the VFW. We know Scott Daniels drives a blue Ford pickup with license plate XGH445. We know Ray Martinez lives alone in a mobile home park off Highway 18. We know Danny Chen works at the port in Portland and takes the same bus route every morning. My blood went cold. They'd been watching not just me, but all my allies. If you're threatening my friends, I'm explaining reality. You've involved innocent people in something that doesn't concern them. That was unwise. Their safety depends on your cooperation. The line went dead. I looked around the room at the three men who'd volunteered to help protect me, realizing that I'd put them in danger by accepting their assistance. Marcus Walsh wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was threatening everyone I cared about. He knows about all of you, I said, and repeated the conversation. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Scott laughed, a dry sound that held no humor. That son of a bitch thinks he's dealing with scared civilians. He doesn't understand who he's messing with. Scott's right, Ray said. These people made a tactical error. They threatened veterans, men who've been shot at by professionals and didn't run then. So we escalate, Danny said. Instead of just playing defense, we start gathering intelligence on them. Find out where they live, where they operate, who they really work for. Is that smart, I asked? We're talking about taking on organized criminals. Mike looked up from his laptop where he was reviewing the night surveillance footage. Keith, you were a soldier once. What's the first rule of combat? I thought back to basic training, to the lessons that had kept me alive in Vietnam. Take the initiative. Force the enemy to react to your moves instead of reacting to theirs. Exactly. These people think they can terrorize us into submission. Time to show them they're wrong. What do you have in mind? Ray was already making notes on his map. We start by identifying their base of operations. They've been using your property, but they've got to have a primary facility somewhere. Probably within 50 miles, close enough for regular access, but far enough to avoid detection. How do we find that? The same way we found them in the first place. Surveillance, intelligence gathering, and good old-fashioned detective work. Danny was examining the camera footage from earlier in the evening. I got partial plates on 2 of their vehicles. Ray, can your contacts run these through the system? Unofficially, yeah, but it'll take a day or 2. That's fine. We're not in a hurry. The key is to be systematic, methodical. Build a complete picture of their operation before we make any moves. Scott stood up and checked his watch. It's almost 3 a.m. We should get some sleep and start fresh tomorrow. But from now on, nobody travels alone. We use the buddy system until this is resolved. As my friends prepared to leave, I realized that the conflict had shifted. What started as a defense of my property had become something larger. A group of veterans taking on organized crime using skills learned in military service to protect their community. Marcus Walsh thought he was dealing with one isolated old man. He was about to discover that he'd picked a fight with a brotherhood that didn't retreat and didn't surrender. The war for my property was about to become a war for something much more important. The principle that good men don't let evil triumph without a fight. The next morning, I met Scott at the VFW post for what looked like our regular Thursday breakfast, but was actually a strategy session. Ray arrived with coffee and a folder full of information he'd gathered overnight through his law enforcement contacts. The partial plates Danny got were enough to identify 2 of the vehicles, Ray said, spreading photos across the table. A 2018 Chevy Suburban registered to Cascade Freight Solutions, and a Ford F-250 registered to someone named Eddie Garrett. Garrett, I said. Rachel mentioned the Garrett brothers were part of the theft crew. Right, Eddie and Paul Garrett, both with prior convictions for cargo theft and burglary. The interesting thing is where the Suburban is registered. Ray pulled out a map of the Portland metro area with several locations marked in red. Cascade Freight Solutions lists its business address as a warehouse complex in southeast Portland, near the port facilities. But the vehicle is registered to a private address in Gresham, which means either Marcus Walsh is using fake business addresses or he's got a separation between his legitimate operations and his criminal activities. The warehouse could be clean, used for actual freight operations to provide cover for the theft business. Danny arrived with Mike Kowalski and another veteran I didn't recognize, a lean man in his 50s with the kind of alert eyes that come from years of dangerous work. Keith, this is Steve Palmer, Danny said. He works private security in Portland, specializes in corporate investigation and surveillance. Steve shook my hand with a firm grip. Danny filled me in on your situation. I've had some encounters with cargo theft operations in my line of work. These people are more sophisticated than your average criminals, but they're not untouchable. What can you tell us about Marcus Walsh? I've heard the name, Word is he's ex-military, probably Army logistics or transportation. He understands supply chains, knows how to move goods efficiently without attracting attention. But he's also got a reputation for violence when business deals go bad. That confirmed what Tyler had warned me about. Marcus Walsh wasn't someone who accepted failure gracefully. "What's our next move?" Scott asked. Steve pulled out a tablet and showed us satellite images of the warehouse complex Ray had identified. "We need to confirm whether this facility is actually being used for criminal operations. That means surveillance, but it has to be careful. These people know they're being watched by law enforcement, so they'll be alert to obvious reconnaissance. How do we do surveillance without being obvious? We use the fact that this is an industrial area with lots of legitimate traffic, delivery trucks, service vehicles, workers coming and going at all hours. One more work truck or service van doesn't attract attention. Danny was studying the satellite images. What about access points? If we need to get close for detailed observation, there's a truck stop about half a mile away with a clear sight line to the warehouse complex. We could set up long-range surveillance from there, document who comes and goes, build a pattern of their operations. How long would that take? Depends on how active they are. If Marcus Walsh is running a significant operation, we should see evidence within a week. Truck traffic, personnel movement, maybe even transfer of stolen goods. Ray was making notes on his map. We'll need to coordinate with Rachel Torres. She's got the legal authority to conduct this kind of investigation. We don't want to compromise any evidence by operating outside the law. Speaking of Rachel, I said, I should probably call her and update her on last night's threats. I stepped outside to make the call, leaving the veterans to plan surveillance details. Rachel answered immediately, like she'd been waiting for my call. "Keith, how did the court hearing go?" "We won. The judge dismissed the guardianship petition and referred Tyler and Crystal to the district attorney for fraud charges." "That's great news, but I'm guessing there were consequences." I told her about Marcus Walsh's phone calls, the threatening surveillance of my allies, the escalation from property disputes to personal intimidation. "That changes everything," Rachel said. "If Walsh is threatening violence against veterans who are helping you, this becomes a federal case. Threatening witnesses, intimidating people involved in a criminal investigation. That's serious federal crime. What does that mean for us?" "It means you've got more resources available. I can reach out to FBI contacts who specialize in organized crime. The cargo theft operation is already on their radar. If we can connect your case to their ongoing investigations, you'll have federal protection. How long will that take?" "Maybe a week to make the connections and get approval for federal involvement. In the meantime, you need to be very careful. Walsh isn't bluffing about the violence. I've seen his handiwork before." "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, a truck driver tried to extort money from Walsh's operation, threatening to expose their route schedules to law enforcement. The driver ended up in the hospital with 2 broken legs and a warning to keep his mouth shut. Walsh doesn't negotiate with people who threaten his business. After I hung up, I rejoined the group inside the VFW post. They'd developed a preliminary surveillance plan with rotating shifts watching the warehouse complex and additional security for my property. "There's something else we need to discuss," Steve said. "Personal protection for everyone involved in this operation." Walsh made it clear that he considers all of you to be legitimate targets. "What kind of protection?" "Situational awareness mostly. Varying your routines, checking for surveillance, traveling in pairs when possible. Nothing paranoid, just basic precautions." Mike was cleaning his glasses, a habit I'd noticed when he was thinking through complex problems. "The other thing we need to consider is escalation. If Walsh feels threatened by our investigation, he might move from intimidation to direct action, such as attacking one of us directly, vandalizing property, maybe even attempting to plant evidence to discredit our investigation. We need to be prepared for dirty tactics." Danny nodded. "That's why we document everything. Every contact, every threat, every suspicious activity. Build a paper trail that protects us legally and provides evidence for prosecution." "All right," Scott said. "Let's make assignments. Ray, you coordinate with Rachel Torres and work the law enforcement angle. Danny and Mike, you handle surveillance of the warehouse complex. Steve, you work personal security and counter surveillance. Keith and I will maintain defensive positions at the property and monitor for any escalation." As we prepared to leave, I realized that what had started as a personal fight to save my home had become something much larger. A group of veterans was taking on organized crime, using military tactics and civilian law enforcement resources to protect their community. It was exactly the kind of mission we'd trained for during our military service, except now we were fighting for our own backyard instead of some foreign battlefield. That afternoon, I spent time in my workshop, ostensibly working on the Camaro, but actually thinking about Michelle. She'd started this investigation, gathered the initial evidence, developed the plan that had led to Tyler and Crystal's exposure in court. Now her work was being continued by a brotherhood of veterans who understood the importance of fighting for what's right. I found myself talking to her picture, which I'd moved from the house to the workbench where I could see it while I worked. You'd be proud of these guys, Michelle. They didn't have to get involved, but they stepped up anyway. Just like you knew they would. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. Marcus Walsh again, Mr. Rodriguez, I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer. I told you last night, I'm not interested. That's unfortunate, because the offer is about to be withdrawn. After tonight, there won't be any more negotiations. What happens after tonight? After tonight, we stop asking nicely. The line went dead, and I knew the psychological warfare phase was over. Whatever Marcus Walsh had planned next, it was going to be more direct and more dangerous than late-night phone calls. I called Scott immediately. It's happening tonight, Walsh said. No more negotiations after today. Copy that. We're moving to full defensive positions. Nobody travels alone. Nobody goes anywhere without backup. Scott, maybe you guys should back out of this. I never meant for anyone else to be in danger. Keith, shut up and listen to me. We're veterans. We swore an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Marcus Walsh and his crew are domestic enemies threatening one of our own. We don't abandon our brothers, and we sure as hell don't surrender to criminals, understood? Good. Now lock up your house, arm yourself, and get ready for a long night. This is where we find out what these people are really made of. I hung up and looked around my workshop one more time. The Camaro sat under its cover, still unfinished after 12 years. Michelle's picture smiled at me from the workbench. Tools I'd collected over decades hung in their designated places, each one a memory of projects completed and problems solved. If Marcus Walsh thought he could take all this away from me, he was about to learn that some fights are worth everything you've got. The battle for my home was about to begin. By 8 p.m., my property was transformed into a defensive position. Scott had arrived with Ray Martinez and Danny Chen, each man carrying gear that suggested they'd done this kind of work before. Mike Kowalski was monitoring the warehouse complex in Portland, maintaining radio contact with our group. Perimeter is secure, Danny reported, checking his tablet that showed feeds from motion sensors positioned around the property boundaries. 3 early warning positions, overlapping fields of observation, clear sight lines to all approach routes. Ray had established a command post in my living room with maps, communication equipment, and direct contact with Rachel Torres and her federal law enforcement connections. If this goes bad, we'll have backup within 20 minutes. State Police Tactical Team is on standby. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Scott said. He was positioned near the front window with a clear view of the main driveway and the approach from the highway. The goal is deterrence, not warfare. At 9:30, the first probe came. A single vehicle, moving slowly up the logging road with its headlights off. Danny's sensors detected it before we could see it, giving us advance warning to prepare. 1 vehicle, Danny reported, stopping at the bend, same position as last night. No visual on occupants. We watched on the monitors as the vehicle sat motionless for several minutes. Then a figure got out and started walking toward the barn, moving carefully but not trying to hide. Single individual approaching the barn, Ray said. Male average height, carrying what looks like a briefcase. Briefcase, Scott said. That's not what I expected. The figure reached the barn and stood in front of it for a moment, then placed the briefcase on the ground and walked back toward the vehicle. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. He left something, Danny said. Package or container of some kind. We watched the vehicle leave, then waited another 10 minutes to make sure it was really gone before investigating. Scott and I approached the barn together, while Ray and Danny maintained overwatch from the house. The briefcase was sitting right in front of the barn door, a standard black business case with no identifying marks. A note was taped to the top. Mr. Rodriguez, final offer inside. You have until midnight to respond. Could be a bomb, Scott said. Or it could be exactly what it says, a final offer. Either way, we don't open it here. Let's move it away from the buildings and call in Danny's expertise. We carried the briefcase to an open area about 100 yards from the house. Danny brought a portable X-ray scanner he'd borrowed from his work at the port, along with other equipment I didn't recognize. No explosive devices detected, he reported after scanning the case. Appears to contain papers and what might be cash or other flat objects. Safe to open. As safe as anything can be, but let's do it remotely just in case. Using a mechanical arm device that Danny had rigged up, we opened the briefcase from 50 yards away. Inside were stacks of cash, legal documents, and a handwritten note. Scott retrieved the contents while I read the note aloud. Mr. Rodriguez, $500,000 cash for immediate sale of your property to the buyer of our choice. Legal documents are prepared for signature. If you agree, place a white flag in your front window by midnight. If you refuse, there will be no further contact from us. But we cannot guarantee your safety from other parties who have financial interest in resolving this matter. Other parties, Ray said when we reported back to the command post. That's a new wrinkle. Walsh is saying he can't control what happens next if you refuse the offer. Could be a bluff, Scott suggested, or it could mean there are bigger players involved than we realize, Danny said. If Walsh is working for organized crime with serious money invested in this operation, $500,000 might be cheaper than dealing with ongoing law enforcement attention. I looked at the cash, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. Enough to buy a nice house anywhere in Oregon and still have plenty left over for retirement. Enough to end this conflict and keep everyone safe. It's tempting, I admitted. Of course it is, Ray said. But ask yourself this. If you take the money and run, what happens to the next person they target? What happens when they decide some other veteran's property is convenient for their operations? Ray's right, Scott said. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about whether criminals can terrorize honest people into submission. At 11:15, Mike Kowalski called from his surveillance position in Portland with urgent news. Significant activity at the warehouse. He reported multiple vehicles arriving, personnel loading equipment into trucks. Looks like they're mobilizing for a major operation. How many vehicles? At least 6. 2 large trucks, 4 SUVs, probably 20 people total. Ray was already on his radio calling for state police backup. This is bigger than we expected. If Walsh is bringing 20 people, this isn't intimidation anymore. This is assault. How long until backup arrives? 20 minutes minimum, maybe longer if they're coming from Salem. I looked around the room at 3 men who'd volunteered to help protect me, realizing they were about to face 20 criminals in what could become a running gun battle on my property. Maybe I should take the deal, I said. This isn't worth getting people killed. Keith, shut up, Scott said calmly. We've been in worse spots than this. 20 untrained criminals against 4 veterans with defensive positions and superior firepower. I'll take those odds. What if they have military weapons? Then we adapt, but we don't surrender our position without a fight. Danny was checking his equipment, testing communication links, and verifying that our defensive systems were operational. The advantage of fighting on home ground is that we control the terrain. They have to come to us, which means they'll be exposed during their approach. At 11:45, Danny's perimeter sensors detected multiple vehicles approaching from 3 different directions. The main assault was coming. 6 vehicles confirmed, Danny reported. 2 from the logging road, 2 from the main driveway, 2 approaching on foot through the forest from the north. Classic pincer movement, Ray observed. They're trying to surround the house and force a surrender, or they're planning to burn us out, Scott said. Either way, we make our stand here. I thought about Michelle, about the 41 years we'd spent on this land, about the memories embedded in every tree and building. I thought about Tyler somewhere out there, possibly participating in an assault on his childhood home. I thought about the veterans who'd risk their safety to help me fight for what was right. No surrender, I said. No retreat. We hold this ground. At 11:50, floodlights illuminated the property as Marcus Walsh's voice echoed from a bullhorn. Keith Rodriguez, this is your final warning. Come out unarmed and we can still negotiate. Force us to come in after you and people are going to get hurt. Ray was on his radio, coordinating with incoming state police units. ETA 10 minutes, he reported. We hold for 10 minutes, Scott said. Whatever happens, we hold for 10 minutes. At 11:52, the shooting started. The first shots came from the forest, aimed at the house windows to keep us pinned down while assault teams moved closer. The sound of gunfire in the Oregon woods was sharp and immediate, nothing like the distant combat noises you hear in movies. Contact north, Danny reported, returning fire from his position near the kitchen window. Multiple shooters in the tree line. Contact main driveway, Scott called out from the front room. 2 vehicles, personnel advancing on foot. I took position at the back window with my hunting rifle, covering the approach from the logging road. Through my scope, I could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. Men advancing in tactical formation toward my barn. For the next 8 minutes, my property became a battlefield. The veterans used their military training to coordinate defensive fire, while I tried to protect the home Michelle and I had built together. The criminals had superior numbers, but we had better positions and decades of combat experience. At 12 a.m. exactly, state police sirens wailed in the distance, and the criminal assault force began withdrawing as quickly as they'd arrived. By 12:05, it was over. 6 vehicles racing away into the night, leaving behind shell casings, blood trails, and the certain knowledge that this conflict had moved far beyond property disputes into something that would reshape everything. The war for my land had become a real war, and somehow we'd survived the first major battle. The state police tactical team swept my property for the next 2 hours, collecting evidence and documenting the crime scene. Lieutenant Sarah Collins, the team commander, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd obviously dealt with serious criminal violence before. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, as we stood in my shot-up kitchen, looking at bullet holes in the walls where Michelle's ceramic roosters used to hang. 20 armed men against 4 defenders, this could have been a massacre. "We had good defensive positions," Scott said, "and they weren't as professional as they thought they were. Professional enough. We found blood trails leading to at least 3 different vehicles. Someone on their side got hurt. Danny was cataloging damage to the house and outbuildings. 17 bullet holes in the main structure, 12 in the barn, extensive damage to the workshop windows. But the structural integrity is sound." Ray Martinez was coordinating with federal investigators who'd arrived from Portland. The FBI had taken over the case once the shooting started, classifying it as organized crime violence and potential domestic terrorism. "Keith," Lieutenant Collins said, "I need you to understand something. This level of violence means you can't stay here. At least not until we've arrested the people responsible. This is my home. I'm not running. It's not running. It's tactical repositioning until the threat is neutralized." FBI Special Agent Patricia Wu approached our group, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've been tracking Marcus Walsh's operation for 8 months. Your evidence and tonight's assault give us everything we need for federal RICO charges." What does that mean? It means we can prosecute this as organized crime conspiracy, which carries much longer sentences than simple theft charges. But it also means the danger to you is significantly increased. Agent Wu spread photos across my kitchen table, mugshots and surveillance images of men I didn't recognize. Walsh's operation is larger than we initially realized. He's got connections to organized crime families in Seattle and Vancouver. The cargo theft was just one revenue stream in a larger criminal enterprise. How much larger? Conservative estimate, $20 million annually in stolen goods, money laundering, and protection rackets. Your property was a critical link in their distribution network. Shutting it down has cost them significant money. Rachel Torres arrived as the federal agents were finishing their initial investigation. She looked exhausted but determined, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. "Keith, I've been coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're prepared to file federal charges against Walsh and his entire organization, but they need your continued cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" "Testimony, evidence, preservation, and most importantly, your safety. You're the key witness in a case that could put dangerous people in prison for decades. If something happens to you, the case falls apart." Agent Wu nodded. "That's why we're recommending witness protection until the trials are complete." "For how long?" 6 months, maybe a year, depends on how quickly we can apprehend all the defendants and move through the legal process. I looked around my kitchen, seeing bullet holes and shattered windows instead of the comfortable space where Michelle and I had shared thousands of meals. The criminals had already succeeded in driving me from my home even if they hadn't killed me. "What about my friends, Scott, Ray, Danny? They're all targets now too. We're prepared to extend protection to anyone who helped you tonight," Agent Wu said. "But realistically, they're probably safer than you are. Walsh wants you eliminated because you can testify about the property usage. Your friends are just obstacles he'd rather avoid." Scott was examining one of the bullet holes in the kitchen wall, measuring the angle and trajectory. "Keith, she's right. You're the primary target. The rest of us are just complications." "I don't like the idea of hiding while other people clean up my mess." "It's not hiding," Ray said. "It's strategic withdrawal while the professionals do their job. Military tactic, not cowardice." Danny had been monitoring radio traffic from the federal operation. They've identified the warehouse complex as the primary target for raids tomorrow morning. If the evidence from tonight supports what we've gathered over the past week, they'll have enough to shut down the entire network. "What about Tyler and Crystal?" Agent Wu consulted her notes. "Your son and daughter-in-law are being brought in for questioning tomorrow morning. They're not considered flight risks, but they're definitely persons of interest in the larger conspiracy." The thought of Tyler being arrested as part of a criminal conspiracy made my stomach hurt. Despite everything he'd done, he was still my son. The idea that he might go to prison for 10 or 20 years was almost too painful to accept. Is there any way Tyler could cooperate with your investigation? Maybe reduce his charges if he provides information about Walsh's operation? Possibly. But that would depend on how much useful information he has and whether he's willing to testify against Walsh and the others. At 3 a.m., the federal agents finished processing the crime scene and began packing up their equipment. Lieutenant Collins approached me with final instructions. Mr. Rodriguez, you have two options. You can accept federal protection and relocate temporarily while we prosecute this case, or you can remain here with state police security until the immediate threat is resolved. What's the difference? Federal protection means complete anonymity in a secure location, but you'd have no contact with friends or family until the case is resolved. State police protection means you can stay in the area, but with limited freedom of movement and constant security presence. I thought about Michelle, about the promise I'd made to protect what we'd built together. I thought about the veterans who'd risked their lives to help me fight for my home. I thought about Tyler, somewhere in custody, facing the consequences of choices that had spiraled far beyond anything he'd probably intended. I'll take state police protection, I said. I'm not disappearing. This is my home and I'll be nearby when it's safe to return. Understood. We'll establish a secure location within 20 miles of here. Full security team, communication with family and friends, but restricted travel and no public appearances. Rachel approached me as the federal agents were leaving. Keith, I want you to know that Michelle would be proud of what you did tonight. You stood your ground and fought for what was right, even when the odds were against you. I had help, good help. That's what she was counting on. Michelle knew that veterans look out for each other. She planned this entire operation around that assumption. As dawn broke over my shot-up property, I took one last walk through the house and workshop. The Camaro sat under its canvas cover, untouched by the violence that had swept through the building around it. Michelle's picture was still on the workbench, her smile unchanged despite the chaos. We did it, Michelle, I said quietly. We fought back and won. Now I just have to see it through to the end. Scott found me in the workshop as I was packing a bag with clothes and personal items. You ready for this, Keith? Ready as anyone can be for witness protection and federal trials. It won't be forever. And when it's over, you'll have your home back and the satisfaction of knowing you helped put away some genuinely bad people. What about you guys? Are you going to be safe? We're veterans, Keith. We've been in worse spots than this and came home intact. Besides, we've got each other's backs. That's what brothers do. As I loaded my truck for the drive to the safe house, I realized that the war for my property was essentially over. I'd won, but the victory had come at a cost that included bullet holes in my walls, federal protection instead of peaceful retirement, and my son facing serious criminal charges. But I'd kept the promise I made to Michelle. I'd fought for what we built together, and I'd honored the values that had guided our 41 years on this land. The rest was just paperwork and legal proceedings. The hard part was done. The safe house was a modest cabin on a lake about 30 miles from my property, surrounded by state forest and accessible only by a single gravel road that could be easily monitored. Oregon State Police Detective Maria Santos was my primary contact, a competent woman in her 30s who'd worked witness protection cases before. The good news is that this shouldn't last long. Detective Santos told me as we reviewed security procedures. The federal raids this morning were extremely successful. They arrested 14 people, including Marcus Walsh and both Garrett brothers. What about Tyler and Crystal? Your son is cooperating with the investigation. His lawyer worked out a plea agreement yesterday. He'll testify against Walsh and the other defendants in exchange for reduced charges. How reduced? Probably 3 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. Your daughter-in-law is fighting the charges, claiming she was coerced by your son. It's not going well for her. I sat on the cabin's small porch, looking out at the lake and thinking about Tyler. 3 to 5 years in federal prison was still a long time, but it was better than the alternative. At least he'd made the smart choice to cooperate instead of protecting the criminals who'd been using him. When can I see him? That depends on the U.S. Attorney's office probably not until after his testimony, which should be in the next few weeks. The trials are being fast-tracked because of the violence involved. Rachel Torres visited me twice a week, keeping me updated on the legal proceedings and helping me understand the complex federal case that had developed from Michelle's simple investigation. The scope of Walsh's operation was much larger than we initially realized, she explained during one of our meetings. They were moving stolen goods through a network that stretched from California to Canada. Your property was just one of several storage facilities, but it was apparently the most secure and reliable, because Tyler had legitimate access. Exactly. Most of their other locations were abandoned buildings or rented warehouses that could be compromised by law enforcement or rival criminals. Your property offered both security and legal cover through Tyler's family connection. What happens to the property now? It's yours, free and clear. The federal government has no claim on it, and all the criminal charges against Tyler and Crystal are separate from property ownership. You can go home as soon as the trials are complete and the remaining defendants are sentenced. 2 weeks into my stay at the safe house, Scott Daniels and Ray Martinez came to visit, bringing news from the outside world and updates on our veteran friends. Danny's back to work at the port, Scott reported. Mike's got a new security contract in Portland. Steve Palmer is consulting with the FBI on other cargo theft investigations. Everybody's fine. What about the community? How are people reacting to everything that happened? Mixed reactions, Ray said. Some people think you should have just taken the money and avoided the violence. Others think you did the right thing standing up to criminals. And what do you think? I think you honored your wife's memory and protected your community from organized crime. Sometimes that requires fighting, even when fighting is dangerous. Scott pulled out his phone and showed me photos of my property. We've been keeping an eye on the place. The state police finished processing the crime scene last week. The bullet holes are patched, the windows are replaced, everything's secure. How's the workshop? Untouched. Your Camaro's still sitting there under the cover waiting for you to finish it. What about the barn? Empty and clean. No signs that it was ever used for criminal storage. In a few months, you'd never know any of this happened. The isolation of protective custody gave me time to think about everything that had occurred. Michelle's investigation, Tyler's betrayal, the violence that had nearly destroyed my home, the veterans who'd risked their lives to help me fight back. It was like completing a long military mission, the kind where you don't fully understand the scope of what you've accomplished until you're safely back at base, reviewing the operation from beginning to end. Michelle had been the intelligence officer gathering information and developing strategy. Rachel Torres had been the logistics coordinator, providing resources and legal support. The veterans had been my squad, providing tactical support and firepower when the situation escalated to combat. And I'd been the ground commander, making decisions and accepting responsibility for consequences that affected everyone involved. 3 weeks after the federal raids, Detective Santos brought news that the last of Walsh's associates had been arrested in Seattle. The immediate physical threat was over. You can go home anytime you want, she said. The trials will continue for several months, but the defendants are all in federal custody. There's no credible threat to your safety. What about when I testify? Full security during court appearances, but that's standard procedure. The dangerous part is over, Mr. Rodriguez. You won. That evening, I called Tyler's attorney to arrange a meeting before I returned home. He was being held at the Federal Detention Center in Portland, awaiting final sentencing after his cooperation with the prosecution. The meeting took place in a small room with a guard outside and cameras monitoring our conversation. Tyler looked older than his 42 years, thinner and more serious than I remembered. Dad, I'm sorry, he said immediately. I'm sorry about everything. About Mom, about the property, about bringing those people into our lives. How did it start, Tyler? Help me understand. Gambling debts. I got in over my head at an Indian casino. Owed money to people who don't accept payment plans. Marcus Walsh offered me a way out, $5,000 a month for occasional storage on the property. It seemed harmless. When did you realize it wasn't harmless? When Mom got sick and started asking questions about my finances. She figured out I was getting money from somewhere, and she was persistent about finding out where. Did you know she was investigating you? Tyler nodded, looking ashamed. I suspected, but I thought if I could convince you to sell the property, the whole thing would just disappear. I never thought it would escalate to violence. What about Crystal? Crystal was deeper in than I was. She'd been helping Walsh launder money through bank accounts for months before they approached me. When Mom got too close to the truth, Crystal suggested ways to discredit her investigation, such as making Mom's illness look like it was affecting her mental capacity, forging medical records that suggested dementia or confusion. Crystal thought if Mom seemed incompetent, nobody would believe her accusations. I felt sick thinking about Michelle fighting cancer while my son and daughter-in-law were plotting to gaslight her into silence. Tyler, your mother died knowing you'd betrayed our family. Do you understand what that means? He started crying then, the kind of broken sobbing that comes from carrying guilt you can't escape. I know, Dad. I know what I did. I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. Yes, you will. But you made the right choice in the end. Cooperating with the investigation, testifying against Walsh, that took courage. It was the least I could do. After everything that happened after the shooting at the house, I realized how far things had gone beyond what I'd intended. We talked for another hour about his upcoming sentencing, about his plans for prison and afterward, about the possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship after he served his time. I don't expect forgiveness, Tyler said as the meeting ended, but I hope someday you might be able to understand that I never meant for any of this to hurt you or Mom. I understand that you made a series of bad choices that spiraled out of control. I understand that you're accepting responsibility now. Whether that's enough for forgiveness is something we'll have to work out over time. As I left the federal detention center, I realized that my anger toward Tyler had changed into something more complicated. Disappointment, sadness, and a recognition that the son I'd raised was still there underneath the mistakes he'd made. The drive back to my property felt like traveling through time, returning to a life that had been interrupted by months of violence and legal proceedings. Everything looked normal on the surface, but I knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. The war for my land was over, but the work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. Coming home after 2 months in protective custody felt like returning from a war zone, which in many ways it was. The house looked normal from the outside, but I could see where the bullet holes had been patched and painted over. The new windows were slightly different from the originals, and the workshop had a brand new metal roof where the old one had been damaged by gunfire. Scott was waiting for me in the driveway, leaning against his truck with a thermos of coffee and the kind of smile that comes from surviving something dangerous together. "Welcome home, Keith. Good to be back. How does everything look? Like nothing ever happened mostly." "Ray and Danny did good work on the repairs. You've got some new security features you might appreciate." He walked me through the improvements they'd made while I was gone. Motion-activated lighting around all the buildings, a updated alarm system connected directly to state police dispatch, and reinforced locks on doors and windows. The barn's been completely cleaned and reorganized, Scott said as we walked the property. All of Michelle's Christmas decorations are back where they belong, and we added some storage shelves for your tools. What about the surveillance equipment Rachel installed? Still functional but modified. Instead of covert monitoring, it's now a standard home security system. You can keep an eye on the property when you're away, but it's not set up for criminal investigation anymore. The workshop was exactly as I'd left it, except cleaner than it had ever been during my occupancy. The Camaro sat under its cover, and Michelle's picture was back in its place on the workbench. "We took the liberty of organizing your tools," Scott said. "Danny's got a thing about organization. Everything's labeled and arranged by function." I pulled the cover off the Camaro and looked at the project I'd abandoned months ago. The interior work that Michelle had been so excited about was still unfinished. The red vinyl seat covers still in their packaging on the workbench. "Might be time to finish this project," Scott suggested. "Yeah, I think Michelle would like that." That evening, I sat in my kitchen eating dinner alone for the first time since the protective custody period began. The house felt larger without the constant presence of security personnel, but also quieter in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Rachel Torres, calling with updates on the ongoing trials. "How does it feel to be home? Strange, good but strange. It's going to take some adjustment. That's normal. You've been through a traumatic experience that changed your relationship with your own home. It takes time to feel safe again in a place where violence occurred. What's the status of the trials? Moving along quickly. Walsh and 4 of his associates were sentenced yesterday. He got 25 years federal. The others got between 8 and 15 years. The Garrett brothers are pleading guilty next week, and Crystal still fighting the charges. Her lawyer is arguing that she was coerced by Tyler, but the evidence of her independent criminal activity is pretty strong. She's looking at 10 to 12 years minimum. When do I testify? Probably not at all. Walsh's plea agreement eliminated the need for most witness testimony. Your case is essentially resolved. After Rachel hung up, I realized that the legal proceedings I'd been mentally preparing for might not happen. The criminals were going to prison, but without the dramatic courtroom confrontations I'd been expecting. It felt anticlimactic, like training for a mission that gets canceled at the last minute. The next morning, Ray Martinez stopped by with news about Tyler's sentencing. 4 years federal, eligible for parole in 30 months, Ray said. His cooperation with the investigation and the plea agreement saved him from a much longer sentence. Where will he serve the time? Probably minimum security facility in California or Arizona. white-collar criminals, non-violent offenders. He'll be safer there than in general population. Have you talked to him? His lawyer called me yesterday. Tyler wanted to know if you'd be willing to accept letters from him while he's incarcerated. I thought about my son, 42 years old, and facing his first significant consequences for the choices he'd made. Part of me was still angry about the betrayal, but another part recognized that he was still my child, regardless of what he'd done. Yeah, I'll read his letters. 2 weeks after returning home, I started working on the Camaro again. Not because I needed transportation, but because finishing Michelle's project felt like honoring her memory and reclaiming my workshop from the violence that had invaded it. The red vinyl seat covers were exactly as she'd envisioned them, bright and cheerful against the car's black interior. Installing them was tedious work that required patience and attention to detail, the kind of project that occupies your hands while your mind processes complex emotions. Danny Chen stopped by one afternoon while I was working, bringing coffee and updates on our veteran friends. Mike Kowalski got a commendation from the FBI for his surveillance work during the investigation, Danny said. Steve Palmer is consulting on 3 other cargo theft cases. Ray's thinking about coming out of retirement to work with state police on organized crime investigations. What about you? Back to normal at the port. But I've been thinking about what we accomplished, and I'm wondering if there's a way to help other veterans who might face similar situations. What do you mean?
Elder abuse, family financial exploitation, property theft.
These things happen to veterans all the time, but most of them don't have the resources or connections we had. Danny's suggestion sparked something I'd been thinking about since returning home. The veteran community that had rallied to help me represented decades of military experience and civilian expertise. That knowledge could be valuable to other people facing similar threats. You're talking about some kind of organization, informal at first, veterans helping veterans. Scott's got connections throughout Oregon. Ray knows law enforcement. You've got experience with property disputes and legal proceedings. We could help people who don't know how to fight back. That evening, I called Scott and proposed Danny's idea. Within a week, we had the framework for what we started calling Veteran Protective Services, an informal network of retired military personnel who could provide advice, assistance, and advocacy for veterans facing elder abuse or family exploitation. Our first case came from the VFW post in Salem. A 72-year-old Marine veteran whose stepchildren were trying to force him into a nursing home to gain control of his disability payments. The situation was complex, but not violent, exactly the kind of problem that could be solved with good investigation work and legal advice. Ray handled the law enforcement aspects, coordinating with adult protective services and gathering evidence of financial abuse. Danny provided security consultation to help the veteran protect his assets. Scott organized community support through local veteran organizations. I coordinated the overall effort, drawing on lessons learned from my own experience with family betrayal and criminal intimidation. The case took 6 weeks to resolve, but we were successful in exposing the stepchildren's fraud and securing legal protection for the veteran. More importantly, we'd proven that our informal network could effectively help people in situations where traditional law enforcement and social services were insufficient. 3 months after returning home, I finished the Camaro's interior restoration. The car was finally complete after 12 years of intermittent work, looking exactly as Michelle had envisioned it. I took it for a drive through the Oregon countryside, windows down, radio playing the oldies Michelle used to love. For the first time since her death, I felt like she was riding with me, approving of the choices I'd made and the battles I'd fought to honor her memory. The property was secure. The criminals were in prison. Tyler was serving his sentence, but maintaining contact through letters that suggested he was using his time productively, thinking about the future rather than dwelling on his mistakes. And I had found a new purpose in helping other veterans protect themselves and their families from the kinds of predators who had nearly destroyed my own life. At 65, I'd learned that retirement doesn't mean the end of useful work. It just means choosing your battles more carefully and fighting for causes that matter most. The war for my land was over, but the mission to protect others was just beginning. 6 months after returning home, Veteran Protective Services had helped resolve 12 cases of elder abuse and family exploitation across Oregon. What started as an informal network of friends helping each other had evolved into something that attracted attention from veteran organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest. We're getting calls from Washington and Northern California, Scott reported during one of our weekly meetings at the VFW post. Word is spreading that there's a group of veterans willing to take on family predators and financial scammers. Ray Martinez had officially come out of retirement to coordinate law enforcement aspects of our cases. The Oregon Attorney General's office wants to meet with us next month. They're interested in formalizing our relationship and providing legal resources for complex cases. What does that mean for us? Danny asked. Official recognition, probably some funding for equipment and training, but also oversight and bureaucracy that might slow down our response times. I'd been thinking about the balance between effectiveness and legitimacy since we started getting attention from government agencies. Our informal approach allowed us to move quickly and take risks that official organizations couldn't take, but it also meant operating without legal protections that might become important as our cases grew more complex. My vote is we stay independent, but maintain cooperative relationships with law enforcement, I said. We're effective because we're not constrained by bureaucratic procedures. The moment we become part of the system, we lose the flexibility that makes us valuable. Agreed, Scott said. But we need to be careful about liability issues. If someone gets hurt during one of our investigations, we could all face legal problems. Mike Kowalski had joined our group full-time after leaving his security job in Portland. That's why we document everything and coordinate with legitimate authorities whenever possible. We're not vigilantes. We're concerned citizens using legal methods to help people who can't help themselves. Our 13th case came from an unexpected source. Tyler's prison counselor contacted me through his attorney, asking for advice about another inmate whose family was stealing his military disability benefits. Your son has been talking about our organization during his rehabilitation counseling sessions, the counselor explained during a phone call. He suggested that we contact you about this situation. What's the situation? Vietnam veteran, 68 years old, serving time for a nonviolent drug offense. His daughter has power of attorney and has been diverting his disability payments to her personal accounts. He's got no money for commissary or legal representation. Can't the prison help him? Prison resources are limited, and this is a civilian legal matter. But your son says you specialize in helping veterans fight family financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tyler, serving time for his role in a family exploitation scheme, was now recommending that we help other veterans facing similar betrayals. I'll look into it, but I'll need documentation of the financial abuse and contact information for the veteran. 2 weeks later, I found myself visiting Sheridan Federal Correctional Institution to meet with both Tyler and the veteran he'd recommended, a soft-spoken man named Charles Woodward who'd been decorated for service in Vietnam but had struggled with addiction issues since returning home. My daughter convinced me to sign power of attorney papers when I was arrested. Charles explained, said she'd take care of my finances while I was incarcerated. But she's been stealing my disability money for 2 years. How much money are we talking about? About $3,200 a month. Over 2 years, that's maybe $70,000 she's taken. Tyler sat quietly during most of the conversation, but when I was preparing to leave, he asked to speak with me privately. Dad, I know I don't have any right to ask for favors, but Charles is a good man who served his country honorably. His addiction problems don't change the fact that he deserves better than being robbed by his own family. I'll help him, but not because you asked, because it's the right thing to do. I understand, but Dad, I want you to know that helping Charles isn't the only reason I suggested he contact you. What do you mean? I'm proud of what you're doing, what you and your friends have built. It's important work, and I'm glad I could play a small part in connecting you with someone who needs help. Tyler looked different than he had during our last meeting. More settled, less desperate. Prison was apparently giving him time to think about the choices he'd made and the person he wanted to be when he got out. How are you doing with everything else? Better. I'm taking business courses, working in the library, staying out of trouble. I've got a good chance for early parole if I keep my record clean, and after that, I don't know yet. Maybe something in social services, helping people avoid the mistakes I made, or maybe just finding honest work and trying to rebuild relationships with the people I hurt. Charles Woodward's case took 3 months to resolve, but we were successful in recovering most of his stolen disability benefits and getting his daughter prosecuted for elder abuse. More importantly, we helped him establish proper financial protections for after his release from prison. During the investigation, I learned that Charles had 2 sons from a previous marriage who'd been trying to help their father but didn't know how to navigate the legal system. Our intervention not only recovered his money but also reconnected him with family members who genuinely cared about his welfare. This is why we do this work, Ray observed as we wrapped up the case. It's not just about money or legal victories. It's about restoring dignity and family connections that predators destroy. As winter approached, I found myself spending more time in Michelle's garden, which had grown wild during the months of legal proceedings and protective custody. Pulling weeds and preparing the beds for spring planting gave me time to think about everything that had happened and what I'd learned from the experience. The most important lesson was that family betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to be permanent. Tyler's cooperation with the investigation and his recommendation of Charles Woodward suggested that people can grow and change even after making terrible mistakes. Crystal, on the other hand, had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after refusing to cooperate and continuing to claim innocence, despite overwhelming evidence. Her choice to fight rather than accept responsibility had cost her nearly a decade of freedom. The difference between Tyler and Crystal wasn't the severity of their crimes, but their willingness to acknowledge what they'd done and try to make amends. That willingness, I'd learned, was often the difference between family relationships that could be rebuilt and those that were permanently destroyed. I also learned that Michelle's investigation had been more than just evidence gathering. It had been an act of love, a way of protecting me even after her death. The network of veterans who'd rallied to help me was partly her creation, built on relationships she'd encouraged and friendships she'd nurtured over decades of military community involvement. She knew this day might come. Scott had observed during one of our reflective conversations. She knew that Tyler was heading toward trouble, and she prepared you to handle it. One evening in late November, I was working in my workshop when I heard a car coming up the driveway. It was Rachel Torres, making one of her periodic check-in visits to ensure I was adjusting well to normal life. "How are you doing, Keith?" Really doing not just the polite answer. Better, different, but better. The work we're doing with Veteran Protective Services gives me a sense of purpose that retirement didn't provide. And Tyler, we write letters. Carefully optimistic letters about the future and what might be possible after he serves his time. It's not forgiveness yet, but it's communication. That's progress.
Yeah, slow progress, but progress. Rachel looked around the workshop, noting the completed Camaro and the organized tool displays that Danny had installed.
Michelle would be proud of what you've accomplished. I think she'd be proud that I fought back, that I didn't just accept being victimized. She'd also be proud that you found a way to help other people avoid what you went through. As Rachel prepared to leave, she handed me a thick envelope. One last piece of business. The federal government is returning property that was seized during the Walsh investigation. Items that belonged to you but were found during the raids. Inside the envelope were photographs Michelle had taken of our property over the years, family documents that Tyler had apparently given to Walsh's organization as proof of legitimate access, and a handwritten note in Michelle's careful script that I'd never seen before. "Keith, if you're reading this, then the investigation succeeded, and you're safe. I'm proud of the man you've always been and the fighter you became when our family needed it most. Take care of the land, take care of yourself, take care of the people who helped you. Love always, Michelle." I sat in my workshop holding that note, surrounded by tools and memories and the completed Camaro that represented so much more than transportation. Michelle's voice seemed to echo in the metal building, reminding me that love endures even when the people we love are gone. The war for my property had taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Family, home, dignity, and the responsibility to protect others who can't protect themselves. At 66, I'd found my mission for whatever years remained to me. 1 year after the federal raids, Veteran Protective Services had grown into something none of us had anticipated. What started as 4 friends helping each other had evolved into a network of 30 veterans across 3 states, handling cases that ranged from simple financial disputes to complex criminal investigations. We're getting requests for help from as far away as Texas and Florida. Danny reported during our monthly coordination meeting at the VFW post. Veterans organizations nationwide are hearing about our success rate and wanting to establish similar programs. The statistics were impressive. In 18 months, we'd helped recover over $2 million in stolen benefits and assets, assisted in the prosecution of 23 cases of elder abuse, and provided security consultation to hundreds of veterans facing family exploitation. The problem is scalability, Ray Martinez observed. Each case requires significant time and expertise. We can't just franchise this operation without maintaining quality control. Mike Kowalski had been developing training materials for other veteran organizations interested in replicating our model. What we've learned is that the most important element isn't the investigation techniques or security procedures, it's the brotherhood. Veterans helping veterans because we understand each other's service and sacrifice. Steve Palmer, who'd become our de facto coordinator for complex cases, spread out files covering the conference table. We've got 12 active investigations right now, including 3 that involve potential federal crimes. We're reaching the limits of what we can handle as volunteers. I'd been thinking about the growth challenges for months, watching our informal network strain under the weight of its own success. The work was important and rewarding, but it was also demanding in ways that weren't sustainable for men in their 60s and 70s who were supposed to be enjoying retirement. Maybe it's time to consider making this official, I suggested. Nonprofit status, proper funding, legal protections for our investigators. That changes everything, Scott warned. Once we become a formal organization, we lose the flexibility that makes us effective. We'll have boards of directors, grant requirements, bureaucratic oversight, but we'll also have legal authority to conduct investigations, insurance protection for our volunteers, and sustainable funding for equipment and training. Ray nodded thoughtfully. Keith's right about the legal authority. Some of our recent cases have been hampered by law enforcement reluctance to share information with civilians. Official status would solve that problem. The debate continued for 2 hours, weighing the benefits of legitimacy against the advantages of informal operation. In the end, we decided to pursue a hybrid approach, establishing a formal nonprofit organization while maintaining an informal network of volunteers who could operate with greater flexibility when situations required it. Dual-track approach, Danny summarized. Official organization for cases that require legal authority and institutional resources, informal network for situations that need quick response and unconventional methods. 3 weeks later, we received a case that tested both approaches. A 73-year-old Air Force veteran named Walter Henderson contacted us from Phoenix, Arizona. His son-in-law had gained financial power of attorney through fraudulent documents and was systematically draining Walter's accounts while threatening violence if he contacted authorities. The local police say it's a civil matter, Walter explained during our initial phone conversation. Adult Protective Services is backed up with a 6-month waiting list. Meanwhile, my son-in-law is stealing my retirement money and threatening to put me in a nursing home if I cause trouble. What kind of threats? Physical violence. He's got a criminal record, spent time in prison for assault. My daughter is scared of him too, but she won't leave him because of their children. Ray ran background checks while Danny researched the legal situation in Arizona. What we found was troubling. Walter's son-in-law, Marcus Chen, had multiple convictions for domestic violence and fraud, plus suspected connections to organized crime in the Phoenix area. This is beyond what we can handle through normal channels, Ray reported. Chen's got protection from corrupt officials, and Walter's daughter is genuinely afraid for her safety if she cooperates with authorities. Steve Palmer volunteered to travel to Phoenix and conduct on-site investigation, but I had concerns about sending one of our people into a potentially dangerous situation without backup. This is exactly the kind of case where our informal network is more valuable than official procedures, Scott argued. We can move quickly, gather evidence without bureaucratic constraints, and protect Walter before Chen realizes we're involved. Or we can get someone killed trying to be heroes in a situation that requires professional law enforcement, I countered. We were facing the central tension in our mission. The most vulnerable veterans often needed help with the most dangerous predators, situations that required risking the safety of our volunteers to protect people who had no other options. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tyler's prison counselor called to tell me that Tyler had been following our organization's development through news articles and veteran publications. Your son has been corresponding with other incarcerated veterans about family exploitation cases, the counselor explained. He's developed a network of inmates whose families are being victimized while they're unable to protect themselves. What does that have to do with Walter Henderson's situation? Tyler knows someone who might be able to help. Another inmate whose brother lives in Phoenix and has experience with organized crime investigations. I was reluctant to involve Tyler in our operations even indirectly. His cooperation with law enforcement had been valuable, but accepting his help felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. Let me think about it, I told the counselor. That evening, I drove the completed Camaro through the Oregon countryside, thinking about Tyler's offer and what it meant for our family relationship. Michelle's voice seemed to whisper through the radio, reminding me that forgiveness isn't just about absolving past mistakes, it's about allowing people to contribute to solutions for future problems. I called Tyler the next morning. Dad, thank you for calling. I know this is complicated. Tell me about Walter Henderson's situation and what help you think you can provide. The inmate I mentioned is named Joseph Martinez, Ray's cousin actually. He's serving time for white-collar fraud, but his brother Alex is a private investigator in Phoenix who specializes in organized crime cases. And Joseph thinks Alex can help Walter. Alex has been trying to build a case against Marcus Chen for months. Chen's been victimizing elderly people throughout the Phoenix area, but the victims are usually too scared to cooperate with investigators. What makes Walter different? Walter's a veteran with military buddies who are willing to back him up. Alex thinks if he can coordinate with your organization, he might be able to protect Walter while building a case that takes down Chen's entire operation. 3 days later, Ray Martinez was on a plane to Phoenix, carrying credentials from our newly established nonprofit organization and contact information for his cousin's brother. The coordination between family connections and professional resources felt like something Michelle would have arranged, linking people through relationships she'd nurtured over decades. This is how it's supposed to work. Ray reported from Phoenix. Alex Martinez has been investigating Chen for 8 months, but couldn't find victims willing to testify. Walter's military background and our organizational backing give him the confidence to cooperate. The investigation took 6 weeks, but the results exceeded our expectations. Walter's case led to a federal investigation that uncovered a network of elder abuse spanning 4 states, with Chen as a mid-level operator in a criminal organization that had victimized hundreds of elderly veterans. 43 arrests, including corrupt officials in 3 police departments, Ray reported when he returned from Phoenix. Walter recovered all his stolen money plus damages, and Chen's facing 20 years federal time. More importantly, the Phoenix case established our credibility with federal law enforcement agencies, opening doors for cooperation on complex investigations that individual veterans couldn't handle alone. Tyler's information was crucial to the success, Ray admitted during our debrief. Without Alex Martinez's existing investigation, we'd never have been able to move fast enough to protect Walter. I thought about my son, serving time in federal prison, but still finding ways to help fellow veterans protect themselves from family predators. His contribution to Walter's case didn't erase the damage he'd caused to our own family, but it suggested that redemption was possible through service to others. Maybe it's time I visited Tyler again, I said. That's your choice, Scott replied. But remember that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. You don't have to decide everything at once. As winter approached again, marking 2 years since Michelle's death, I found myself grateful for the path that grief and betrayal had led me down. The fight to save my property had evolved into a mission to protect other veterans, connecting me with a brotherhood I hadn't known I needed. The completed Camaro sat in my workshop, a symbol of projects finished and promises kept. Michelle's picture smiled from the workbench, surrounded by tools used not just for restoration but for reconstruction of my life, my relationships, and my sense of purpose. At 66, I'd learned that the most important battles aren't always the ones you choose, but the ones that choose you. 2 months into Tyler's 2nd year of incarceration, I made the drive to Sheridan Federal Correctional Institution for our first face-to-face visit since the Walter Henderson case. The Phoenix investigation had been successful partly because of connections Tyler had facilitated, and I wanted to understand what that meant for our relationship going forward. The visiting room was sterile and institutional, filled with small tables where inmates met with family members under the watchful eyes of correctional officers. Tyler looked healthier than he had during our previous meetings, more settled and confident in a way that suggested he'd found his place within the prison community. "Dad, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." The Phoenix case was successful. Walter Henderson got his money back and Marcus Chen is facing serious federal time. I wanted to thank you for facilitating that connection. Joseph Martinez says there are probably a dozen similar cases we could help with, inmates whose families are being victimized while they're unable to protect themselves. If you're interested, I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. What I saw instead was something I hadn't expected: genuine commitment to helping other people, even from inside a federal prison. Tell me about these other cases, veterans mostly, but not exclusively. People who trusted family members with power of attorney or financial access, only to discover that trust was being abused. The common thread is that they're isolated and don't know how to fight back. And you think Veteran Protective Services can help? I think you've built something that could help a lot of people, not just veterans, but anyone facing family exploitation. The Phoenix case proved that. Tyler pulled out a folder of handwritten notes, carefully organized lists of names and situations he'd compiled through conversations with other inmates. There's a case in San Diego that reminds me of yours. 70-year-old Navy veteran whose stepson is using his property for drug distribution while pressure him to sign over the deed. The local police are compromised and the veteran doesn't have family or friends who can help him. What about Oregon cases? 3 that I know of, including one in Eugene where a Vietnam veteran's daughter is stealing his disability benefits to support her gambling addiction. She's threatened to have him declared incompetent if he tries to stop her. I looked through Tyler's notes, recognizing patterns that were similar to what we'd encountered in our previous cases. family members exploiting trust, using legal manipulation and intimidation to control elderly relatives, targeting people who were isolated and vulnerable. Tyler, why are you doing this? What do you get out of helping these people? He was quiet for a long moment, looking around the visiting room at other inmates meeting with their families. Prison gives you time to think about the choices you made and the person you want to be when you get out. I can't undo the damage I caused to you and Mom, but maybe I can help prevent other families from going through what ours went through, and after you're released. I don't know yet. Maybe social services work, maybe advocacy for veterans or elderly people. Joseph Martinez has been teaching me about investigation techniques and legal procedures. I might be able to contribute something useful to what you're doing. The idea of Tyler joining Veteran Protective Services after his release was complicated. On one hand, his experience with family exploitation could provide valuable insights for helping other victims. On the other hand, our organization's credibility depended on the trustworthiness of our volunteers. That's something we'd have to discuss with the whole team, I said carefully. A lot would depend on how you handle the next year and a half of your sentence. I understand. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just trying to find ways to be useful while I'm here and maybe contribute something positive when I get out. After the visit, I drove home thinking about Tyler's transformation. Prison had apparently given him perspective on his choices and their consequences, leading to what seemed like genuine remorse and a desire to make amends through service to others. But I'd been wrong about Tyler before, trusting him when he was actively betraying our family. The challenge now was determining whether his apparent change was authentic or just another manipulation designed to win sympathy and support. I decided to test his commitment by accepting his help with the Eugene case he'd mentioned. The Eugene veteran was named Robert Kim, a 69-year-old man whose gambling-addicted daughter had gained access to his accounts through a forged power of attorney. The situation was complicated by the fact that Robert's daughter, Lisa, was threatening suicide if he tried to revoke her financial access. Classic manipulation, Ray Martinez observed when we reviewed the case, using emotional blackmail to maintain control over the victim. Danny Chen volunteered to handle the Eugene investigation, driving down from Portland for initial contact with Robert Kim. What he found was a man who was terrified of his own daughter, but unwilling to take action that might drive her to self-harm. She says she'll kill herself if I cut off her access to my accounts. Robert explained during Danny's first visit, but she's gambled away almost $40,000 of my disability money in the past 8 months. Has she ever attempted suicide before? No, but she's been to rehab 3 times for gambling addiction. Each time she convinced me to give her access to money for living expenses while she got back on her feet. Danny coordinated with local mental health professionals to develop a strategy that would protect Robert's finances while ensuring Lisa received appropriate treatment for both her gambling addiction and her threats of self-harm. The key is intervention, not abandonment, the mental health counselor explained. Robert can protect his assets while still supporting his daughter's recovery, but only if he's willing to set firm boundaries. The Eugene case took 4 months to resolve, but the outcome was better than we'd hoped. Lisa entered a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. Robert's remaining assets were protected through legal safeguards, and father and daughter began working with family counselors to repair their relationship. Tyler's information was accurate and helpful, Danny reported. His understanding of family exploitation dynamics was actually quite sophisticated. You think he's changed? I think prison has given him insight into the consequences of betrayal. Whether that translates into permanent behavioral change remains to be seen. The success of the Eugene case led to more referrals from Tyler's prison network. Over 6 months, we handled 5 additional cases involving incarcerated veterans whose families were being victimized during their absence. Each case was successful, and Tyler's initial assessments proved accurate and valuable. More importantly, his contributions didn't seem motivated by self-interest or attempts to manipulate our relationship. He's doing good work, Scott admitted during one of our monthly meetings. The question is whether we're comfortable accepting help from someone who betrayed his own family. People change, Mike Kowalski observed. Military service teaches us that some of the best soldiers I knew were people who'd made serious mistakes earlier in their lives. The difference is timing, Ray said. Military service usually comes before people make life-altering mistakes, not after. We're talking about trusting someone who's proven capable of sustained deception. As Tyler's release date approached, he'd been granted early parole for his cooperation with federal investigations. I realized I had to make a decision about what role, if any, he might play in Veteran Protective Services. The work we were doing was too important to compromise for family loyalty, but Tyler's contributions from prison had been genuinely valuable. More importantly, his understanding of family exploitation might help us better serve veterans facing similar betrayals. I want to propose a probationary arrangement I announced during our next team meeting. Tyler serves a 6-month apprenticeship under close supervision. If he proves trustworthy and effective, we consider full membership. If he doesn't, we part ways with no hard feelings. What kind of supervision? Danny asked. He works exclusively with me on low-risk cases. No independent operations, no access to sensitive information about other volunteers. Basically, he earns trust through demonstrated reliability over time. Scott nodded slowly. That's fair. We all get a chance to evaluate him before making long-term commitments, and if he screws up, then he's out permanently, and our family relationship deals with the consequences. 6 weeks before Tyler's release, I visited him one final time to discuss the possibility of joining our organization. It's a chance to prove that you've changed. I explained, but it's also a chance to fail publicly if you haven't. Are you sure you want that kind of scrutiny? Dad, I betrayed the most important people in my life for money I didn't even need. If I can't handle scrutiny from people who are giving me a chance at redemption, then I don't deserve that chance. And if the other volunteers decide you can't be trusted, then I'll find another way to contribute. But I'll know I tried to make amends for what I did. As I prepared to leave, Tyler asked one final question. How is the property, the house, the workshop, the land Mom loved so much, peaceful, secure? The Camaro's finished and running perfectly. Good. That's what she would have wanted. Driving home, I thought about Michelle and what she would have made of Tyler's apparent transformation. I suspected she would have been cautiously optimistic, willing to give him a chance to prove himself while remaining alert for signs of relapse. Trust but verify, she used to say about Tyler's promises as a teenager. It seemed like appropriate guidance for dealing with his promises as an adult seeking redemption. At 67, I was about to discover whether my son had truly learned from his mistakes, or whether I was setting myself up for another betrayal by someone I wanted to trust but probably shouldn't. Tyler's release from federal prison came on a gray March morning that reminded me of the day Michelle died. I picked him up at the gate driving the completed Camaro because it seemed like the right car for a day that marked both an ending and a beginning. He looked different than he had during our prison visits. Thinner, more cautious, wearing clothes that were obviously new but inexpensive. The confidence he'd shown during our meetings had been replaced by something more uncertain, the reality of facing the world as a convicted felon hitting him as the prison gates closed behind us. Thank you for coming, he said as he got into the passenger seat. I wasn't sure you would. I said I'd give you a chance to prove yourself. That starts with keeping my word. We drove in silence for the first few miles, Tyler looking out the window at Oregon countryside that had changed very little during his 30 months in federal custody. Finally, he spoke. The car looks amazing, Dad, just like Mom always said it would. Finishing it was one of the first things I did when I got home from protective custody. Felt like honoring a promise. I'm glad you finished it. She was so excited about that interior work. Yeah, she was. Tyler was staying at a halfway house in Salem while completing his parole requirements, which included finding employment and attending weekly counseling sessions. His parole officer, a veteran herself, had approved his participation in veteran protective services as long as it remained volunteer work rather than paid employment. The rules are simple, I explained as we drove toward Salem. You work exclusively with me for the first 6 months. No independent contact with other volunteers. No access to sensitive case information. No decision-making authority. You're an apprentice learning the job. What kind of cases will we handle? Simple ones initially. Property disputes, financial record reviews, maybe some surveillance work. Nothing involving criminal organizations or physical danger. And if I prove myself, then we'll gradually increase your responsibilities and let you work with other team members. But that decision gets made by the entire group, not just me. Tyler's first case assignment came a week later, helping an 81-year-old Army veteran named Frank Morrison, whose neighbor was pressuring him to sell his house for below market value. The neighbor had convinced Frank that his property was worthless due to environmental contamination that didn't actually exist. Classic real estate fraud, I explained as Tyler reviewed the case file. The neighbor probably has a buyer lined up who'll pay market price after he scares Frank into selling cheap. How do we prove the contamination claims are false? Environmental testing, property records research, maybe some investigation into the neighbor's connections with potential buyers, standard due diligence work. Tyler threw himself into the investigation with an intensity that surprised me. He spent hours researching property values, environmental regulations, and real estate fraud patterns. His questions were smart, and his attention to detail exceeded what I'd expected from someone with no formal investigation training. Frank's neighbor has been buying up properties in that neighborhood for 2 years, Tyler reported after a week of research. Always the same pattern. Environmental scare tactics, below-market purchases, quick resales to a company called Cascade Development. Cascade Development, I said. That's familiar? It should be. Same company that Marcus Walsh used as a front for his cargo theft operation. Different crime, same business name. Tyler's discovery led to a deeper investigation that revealed a network of real estate fraud targeting elderly veterans throughout Oregon. Frank Morrison's case was just one piece of a larger criminal scheme that had victimized dozens of people over 2 years. This is federal crime territory. Ray Martinez observed when we briefed the team on Tyler's findings. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. We need to involve federal authorities immediately. Agreed, I said. But Tyler's research gave us the foundation for a case that could take down the entire network. Scott Daniels looked at Tyler with what might have been approval. Good work. You've got instincts for this kind of investigation. Tyler's success on the Morrison case led to more complex assignments. Over the next 4 months, he worked on property fraud cases in Portland and Eugene, financial exploitation investigations in Salem and Bend, and a complicated family dispute involving stolen military medals in Medford. Each case demonstrated improved skills and judgment. More importantly, Tyler's interactions with elderly veterans showed genuine empathy and understanding of the emotional trauma that accompanies family betrayal. He connects with the clients in ways that some of our other investigators don't. Danny Chen observed. Maybe because he understands what it's like to be the person who caused that kind of betrayal, or maybe because he's genuinely trying to make amends, Mike Kowalski suggested. Either way, the clients trust him and the case outcomes are good. The real test came in August when we received a case that hit close to home, a veteran in Bend whose son had been stealing disability benefits to support a gambling addiction. The parallels to Tyler's own situation were obvious and uncomfortable. I can handle this case, Tyler said when we reviewed the file. In fact, I might be the best person to handle it. Why? Because I understand both sides. I know what drives someone to betray family trust, and I know what it takes to break that pattern and rebuild relationships. The Bend case took 6 weeks to resolve, but Tyler's approach was different from our usual methods. Instead of focusing exclusively on legal remedies and evidence gathering, he spent time working with both the veteran and his gambling-addicted son to develop solutions that address the underlying problems rather than just the immediate financial theft. The son agreed to enter treatment and make restitution, Tyler reported. The veteran agreed to provide support for recovery while protecting his assets through legal safeguards. It's not perfect, but it's better than destroying the family through criminal prosecution. That's not always possible, Ray warned. Some cases require criminal justice solutions. I understand that. But when family reconciliation is possible, shouldn't we try to preserve relationships while still protecting the victim? Tyler's question sparked a debate that continued for weeks. Whether Veteran Protective Services should focus purely on legal justice or also consider family healing as part of our mission. Our job is to protect veterans from exploitation, Scott argued. Family therapy isn't our responsibility, but family healing can be part of protection, Tyler countered. If we can solve the underlying problems that cause exploitation, we prevent future victimization. I found myself agreeing with Tyler more often than I'd expected. His perspective, informed by personal experience with family betrayal and redemption, brought a dimension to our work that we'd been missing. The kid's got a point, Danny admitted. Prevention is better than prosecution when it's achievable. As Tyler's 6-month probationary period neared its end, I realized that he'd proven himself in ways I hadn't anticipated. His investigation skills were strong, his commitment to helping veterans was genuine, and his insights about family dynamics were valuable additions to our team's capabilities. More importantly, he demonstrated trustworthiness through consistent reliability over 6 months of close supervision. I'm recommending Tyler for full membership in the organization, I announced during our October team meeting. He's earned it through performance and character. The vote was unanimous. Tyler Rodriguez, convicted felon and former family betrayer, was welcomed into Veteran Protective Services as a full member with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Thank you, Tyler said, when I told him about the vote. I know this wasn't easy for any of you. You earned it. But understand that trust, once broken, takes years to fully rebuild. This is just the beginning, I understand, but it's a beginning I'm grateful for. That evening, I sat in my workshop looking at Michelle's picture and thinking about the path that had led from her hidden investigation to Tyler's redemption. The journey had been longer and more complicated than either of us could have anticipated. But it had arrived at something that felt right. The war for my property had evolved into a mission to protect other veterans. Tyler's betrayal had transformed into an opportunity for reconciliation and service. Michelle's love had endured through death, legal proceedings, and family reconstruction. At 68, I'd learned that the most important victories aren't won in courtrooms or battlefields, but in the quiet moments when people choose to do better than they've done before. Tyler had made that choice. Now we'd see if he could sustain it. 2 years after Tyler's release from prison, Veteran Protective Services faced its most complex case yet. The request came through official channels. The Department of Veterans Affairs asked for our assistance with a multi-state investigation involving systematic fraud targeting disabled veterans. This is bigger than anything we've handled before, Ray Martinez explained during our emergency meeting. The VA estimates that over 400 veterans have been victimized across 8 states, with total losses exceeding $15 million. The case involved a network of fraudulent companies that specifically targeted veterans with cognitive disabilities, convincing them to sign over power of attorney, and then systematically draining their disability benefits and assets. The sophistication level is unprecedented, FBI Special Agent Patricia Wu told us during the briefing. These criminals have developed psychological profiles for different types of veterans, customized approaches for various disability conditions, and legal structures that make prosecution extremely difficult. Tyler raised his hand during the briefing, something that still surprised me even after 2 years of working together. What makes this different from the Marcus Walsh operation we dealt with before? Scale and organization. Agent Wu replied. Walsh was running a regional theft operation with maybe 20 people involved. This network includes over 100 people across 8 states, with legitimate businesses providing cover for criminal activities. The federal authorities wanted Veteran Protective Services to coordinate victim outreach and support, helping traumatized veterans understand their rights and prepare for testimony in what could become the largest elder abuse prosecution in federal history. Why us? Scott asked. Because you're veterans helping veterans, Agent Wu said. Victims who won't trust law enforcement or government agencies will often open up to people who understand their military experience and disability challenges. Danny Chen was studying the geographical distribution of victims. Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. That's a lot of ground to cover, which is why we're proposing a temporary expansion of your organization, Agent Wu said. Federal funding for additional investigators, travel expenses, and coordination resources. Think of it as a federal contract for veteran advocacy services. The offer was tempting but complicated. Federal funding would provide resources we'd never had access to, but it would also bring oversight and bureaucracy that could limit our effectiveness. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I asked. 18 months for the investigation phase, then potentially 2 years of trials and appeals. It's a long-term commitment. Mike Kowalski raised the question we were all thinking: what happens to our regular cases during this federal contract? You'd need to prioritize the federal investigation, but there's no prohibition against continuing your current work as time permits. After Agent Wu left, our team spent 3 hours debating whether to accept the federal contract. The arguments were compelling on both sides. This could be our chance to help hundreds of victims and establish national credibility for veteran protection services, Ray argued. Or it could be the end of our independence and flexibility, Scott countered. Once we're taking federal money, we're subject to federal rules and oversight. Tyler had been quiet during most of the debate, but finally spoke up. Can I make a suggestion? Go ahead, I said. What if we split our operations? Some of us take the federal contract and focus on the multi-state investigation. Others maintain our independent status and continue handling local cases. That way we preserve both capabilities. Dual-track approach again. Danny observed it worked when we were deciding between formal and informal organization status. The solution we developed was elegant. Tyler Ray and Mike would take temporary federal assignments to work the multi-state case, while Scott, Danny, Steve Palmer, and I continued our independent operations in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. This gives us the best of both worlds, I explained to Agent Wu when we presented our decision. Federal resources for the big investigation, continued flexibility for local cases, and it gives Tyler a chance to prove himself on a national stage, Ray added. Tyler's assignment was coordinating with victims in California and Nevada, using his understanding of family betrayal psychology to help traumatized veterans tell their stories to federal investigators. These people have been victimized by family members they trusted. Tyler explained to Agent Wu, they're not just dealing with financial loss. They're dealing with the emotional trauma of betrayal by people who were supposed to protect them. You seem to understand that psychology pretty well. Personal experience. I've been on both sides of family betrayal. Tyler's work with federal victims was remarkable to observe. His ability to connect with people who'd been betrayed by family members was unlike anything I'd seen from professional investigators or counselors. He gets it in a way that other people don't, one victim told me during a follow-up call. When Tyler tells me that family betrayal doesn't define my worth as a person, I believe him because I can tell he struggled with the same feelings. 6 months into the federal investigation, Tyler's victim advocacy work had been so successful that the FBI requested his assistance with other cases involving family exploitation of vulnerable adults. Your son has developed expertise that's valuable beyond veteran issues. Agent Wu told me, we'd like him to consider permanent federal employment as a victim advocacy specialist. The offer represented an opportunity Tyler had never imagined when he was released from prison. A legitimate career using his personal experience with betrayal and redemption to help other people heal from family trauma. It's a chance to make this work my life instead of just my redemption project. Tyler told me when we discussed the federal job offer. Are you ready for that level of responsibility? I think so. The work feels right, Dad. Like it's what I'm supposed to be doing with whatever years I have left. What about our family relationship? If you take a federal job, you might be traveling constantly, working cases across the country. Our relationship is strong enough now to handle geography. Besides, you taught me that service to others is the most important work anyone can do. Tyler accepted the federal position, becoming one of the youngest victim advocacy specialists in FBI history. His first permanent assignment was developing training programs for law enforcement agencies on recognizing and responding to elder abuse in veteran families. The irony isn't lost on me, Tyler said during his farewell dinner with our Oregon team. I'm teaching police officers how to identify the kinds of crimes I used to commit. That's not irony, Scott observed. That's redemption. As Tyler prepared to move to Washington, D.C. for his federal assignment, I reflected on the transformation I'd witnessed over 4 years. The son who'd betrayed our family for gambling money had become a federal agent specializing in protecting vulnerable people from family exploitation. Michelle would be proud. I told him the night before he left Oregon. You think so? I know so. She always believed that people could change if they were willing to do the work. What about you, Dad? Are you proud? I thought about everything we'd been through together. The betrayal, the legal battles, the violence, the slow rebuilding of trust through shared work helping other families. Yeah, Tyler, I'm proud of the man you've become. The next morning, I drove Tyler to the airport in the completed Camaro, a farewell gesture that felt appropriate for someone who'd helped me finish projects that had seemed impossible. Take care of yourself, Dad, and take care of Veteran Protective Services. What you built is important. What we built, I corrected. You played a part in making it what it became. As Tyler's plane disappeared into the Oregon sky, I thought about Michelle and wondered if she'd somehow known that our family's darkest moment would eventually lead to its redemption. The war for my property had begun with betrayal and violence, but it was ending with forgiveness and purpose. Tyler's federal career represented the final victory in a battle that had taken 5 years to resolve. At 69, I'd learned that the most important journeys aren't from one place to another, but from one version of yourself to a better version of yourself. Tyler had completed that journey. Now it was time to see what new missions the future would bring. 3 years after Tyler left for his federal assignment, Veteran Protective Services had evolved into something none of us had originally envisioned. What started as 4 veterans helping one friend had grown into a network of 80 volunteers across 12 states, with official recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs and partnerships with law enforcement agencies nationwide. We've handled over 300 cases, Danny Chen reported during our annual coordination meeting, now held at the VFW Post in Salem to accommodate representatives from affiliate chapters across the West Coast. Recovery of stolen benefits and assets exceeds $8 million, and we've assisted in the prosecution of 67 cases of elder abuse. The numbers were impressive, but what mattered more to me were the individual stories. The 74-year-old Marine whose grandson was stealing his pension, the Vietnam veteran whose daughter was using his disability status to claim false benefits, the retired Air Force colonel whose business partner was embezzling from their shared company. Each case represented not just financial recovery, but the restoration of dignity and family relationships that predators had tried to destroy. The most significant development this year was our partnership with the FBI's Elder Justice Initiative. Ray Martinez announced. Tyler Rodriguez has been instrumental in developing federal training programs that have been implemented in 23 states. Tyler called me monthly from Washington, D.C., sharing stories from his federal cases and updates on his work with other victim advocacy specialists. His career had flourished beyond what either of us had expected when he was released from prison. Dad, we're seeing patterns of family exploitation that go way beyond what we understood when we started this work, he told me during one of our conversations. There are organized networks specifically targeting military families, exploiting everything from deployment schedules to PTSD symptoms. Are you getting federal resources to address that? More than we know what to do with? The problem isn't money or authority. The problem is scale. For every case we solve, there are 10 more we don't have time to investigate. Tyler's observation reflected the challenge that had consumed my thinking for months: how to scale protection services for vulnerable veterans without losing the personal touch and flexibility that made our approach effective. The solution came from an unexpected source. Steve Palmer had been developing online training programs for veteran organizations interested in replicating our model, and the response had been overwhelming. We've got inquiries from veteran groups in 38 states. Steve reported American Legion posts, VFW chapters, independent veteran organizations. Everyone wants to know how to establish local protective services. What are they looking for specifically? Training, legal guidance, investigation procedures, victim advocacy techniques, basically everything we learned through trial and error over the past 6 years. The idea that emerged from these conversations was revolutionary. Instead of trying to expand veteran protective services directly, we would franchise our methods and expertise to local veteran organizations nationwide. Think of it as military doctrine, Scott Daniels explained. We develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Local units adapt them to their specific operational environments. Mike Kowalski, who'd returned from his federal assignment and was now coordinating our expansion efforts, outlined the franchise model during a presentation to potential affiliate organizations. Veteran Protective Services provides initial training, ongoing consultation, and coordination with law enforcement agencies. Local chapters provide personnel, local knowledge, and direct victim services. Everyone benefits from shared intelligence and resources. The franchise model launched with pilot programs in Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, each adapted to local legal requirements and veteran demographics. The results exceeded our expectations. Texas handled 23 cases in their first year, Mike reported. Florida resolved 19 cases, including a major financial exploitation ring targeting Cuban-American veterans in Miami. North Carolina broke up a real estate fraud scheme that had been victimizing rural veterans for 3 years. More importantly, the affiliate chapters were developing innovations and best practices that improved our overall capabilities. The Florida chapter developed a victim counseling program that's more effective than anything we've tried, Danny observed. The Texas chapter created legal advocacy procedures that we should adopt in Oregon. As our network grew, I found myself spending more time on strategic planning and less time on direct casework. At 72, the transition from field operator to organizational leader felt natural but also bittersweet. You miss the investigation work, Ray observed during one of our planning sessions. I miss the direct connection with victims, I admitted. Working with Frank Morrison or Walter Henderson, seeing their relief when we solved their problems. That's harder to achieve when you're managing a national organization, but you're helping hundreds of veterans instead of dozens. The scale of impact is much larger. I know, it's just different. The difference became more apparent when I received a letter from Charles Woodward, the Vietnam veteran Tyler had recommended from prison. Charles had been released and was working as a volunteer with our Texas affiliate, helping other veterans navigate family exploitation cases. Mr. Rodriguez, his letter read, I wanted you to know that the help your organization provided changed my life in ways that go beyond recovering stolen money. You showed me that veterans look out for each other even when we've made mistakes. I'm trying to pass that forward by helping other people who are where I was 2 years ago. Charles's letter reminded me that our work wasn't just about financial recovery or criminal prosecution. It was about restoring faith in human decency and the bonds of brotherhood that connect people who've served their country. That evening, I walked through Michelle's garden, which I'd finally learned to maintain properly after years of neglect. The roses she'd planted were blooming again, and the vegetable beds were producing tomatoes and peppers that reminded me of meals we'd shared before Tyler's betrayal changed everything. Michelle's picture on the workshop bench was faded now, but her smile remained as warm and encouraging as it had been when she was alive. I found myself talking to her about Tyler's success, about the organization we'd built, about the hundreds of veterans whose lives had been improved because she'd been brave enough to investigate criminal activity while fighting cancer. "You'd be proud of what Tyler's accomplished," I said to her picture. "He's using his experience with betrayal to help other families heal from similar trauma. It's exactly the kind of redemption you always believed was possible." The workshop around me contained tools I'd used not just for car restoration, but for investigation work that had protected vulnerable people from predators. The Camaro sat under its cover, still running perfectly after 7 years of completion, a symbol of projects finished and promises kept. At 72, I'd built something that would outlast me. Veteran Protective Services would continue helping people long after I was gone, guided by principles Michelle and I had learned through personal experience with betrayal and reconciliation. "The most dangerous betrayal comes from family," I said to Michelle's picture, repeating words I'd written in victim advocacy materials. "But the strongest healing also comes from family, when people choose love over self-interest." Tyler had made that choice. Our veteran brotherhood had made that choice. Hundreds of people whose cases we'd handled had made that choice, choosing trust over cynicism despite being hurt by people who should have protected them. Outside the workshop, my property stretched into the Oregon forest, 41 acres that had been threatened by criminals but was now secure under legal protections that would preserve it for future generations. The land that Michelle and I had loved together would continue providing sanctuary for wildlife and memories for whoever inherited it someday. The war for my property had evolved into something larger than I'd ever imagined. A mission to protect vulnerable people and a legacy of service that honored both military values and family love. The battles were over. The healing would continue forever. 5 years later, I celebrated my 77th birthday at the annual Veteran Protective Services Conference in Portland. Representatives from 47 affiliate chapters across 23 states gathered to share success stories, develop new strategies, and honor the memory of Michelle Rodriguez, whose investigation had started everything. Tyler flew in from Washington, D.C. for the conference, bringing his wife Sarah and their 3-year-old daughter Emma. Seeing my son as a husband and father building the kind of family life he'd nearly destroyed through his earlier choices felt like watching someone complete a journey I'd never been sure he'd survive. "Dad, I wanted to introduce Emma to her grandfather," Tyler said as we stood in the hotel lobby surrounded by veterans from across the country. "Hello, Emma," I said, kneeling down to her level. "I'm your Grandpa Keith." She studied my face with the serious concentration that small children bring to meeting new people, then smiled and reached for the veteran pin on my jacket lapel. "Shiny," she said. "Yes, it is. Someday I'll tell you stories about why it's important." The conference keynote speaker was FBI Director Patricia Wu, who'd been promoted after her successful prosecution of the Marcus Walsh organization and other criminal networks targeting veterans. "Veteran Protective Services represents the best of American values," she told the assembled delegates. "Veterans caring for veterans, families healing from betrayal, communities protecting their most vulnerable members. You've saved lives, recovered millions of dollars in stolen benefits, and restored faith in human decency." After the formal presentations ended, our original Oregon team gathered in the hotel bar for what had become our annual reunion. Scott Daniels, now 75 and officially retired from active casework. Ray Martinez, 73 and serving as our national law enforcement liaison. Danny Chen, Mike Kowalski, Steve Palmer, all still active but gradually transitioning to advisory roles. "You know what Michelle would say if she could see all this?" Scott asked, gesturing toward the crowded conference reception. "She'd say we exceeded expectations," I replied. "And she'd probably want to know when we're going to start helping military families deal with deployment-related financial abuse." "Actually," Tyler said, "that's my next federal assignment. The Pentagon has asked me to develop protective protocols for military families during extended deployments." Ray raised his beer to Michelle Rodriguez, who started this mission, and to Keith Rodriguez, who had the courage to see it through. "To all the veterans who understood that protecting each other is the most important mission we can undertake," I replied. As the evening wound down, Tyler walked me to my hotel room, carrying sleeping Emma while Sarah gathered their things. "Dad, thank you for giving me a second chance. For believing that people can change when they're willing to do the work. You earned that second chance through 5 years of consistent choices. I'm proud of the man you've become, What's next for you? You've built something that will continue long after any of us are around to guide it. I thought about the question I'd been asking myself for months. At 77, I had more years behind me than ahead of me, but I also had more energy and purpose than I'd expected at this age. I think it's time to write the story. Michelle's investigation, our family's journey from betrayal to reconciliation, the lessons we learned about protecting vulnerable people. Future generations might benefit from understanding how this all started. That's a good idea. People need to know that family betrayal isn't the end of the story if you're willing to fight for what's right. The next morning, I drove the Camaro back to Oregon. Windows down, radio playing the oldies Michelle had loved. The car ran as smoothly as it had when I'd first completed it 8 years earlier, a testament to quality work and regular maintenance. My property waited at the end of the gravel driveway, 41 acres of forest and cleared land that had been threatened by criminals but was now protected by legal safeguards and the vigilance of a community that understood its value. In my workshop, Michelle's picture smiled from the workbench, surrounded by tools that had been used for restoration, investigation, and protection. The space that had once hidden evidence of criminal activity was now filled with equipment for woodworking, car repair, and the occasional security consultation for veterans facing family exploitation. At 77, I'd learned that the most important victories aren't won quickly or easily. They're earned through persistence, courage, and the willingness to fight for principles that matter more than personal comfort. The war for my property had ended years earlier, but the mission to protect vulnerable people would continue as long as there were veterans willing to serve each other with the same dedication they'd once shown their country. Some battles choose you. The lucky ones teach you who you really are and what you're really fighting for. I'd been very lucky indeed. The deepest betrayals come from those we trust most, but the strongest redemption comes from choosing to serve others despite being wounded by the people who should have protected us. True strength isn't measured by the battles you win, but by your willingness to keep fighting for what's right even when the people you're fighting for have given you every reason to walk away.